Chapter 1400. There was a crack in the sky. The true water of the blood river, the true water of the underworld, the mysterious heaven tribulation flame, the 9 serenities wind, and all the other calamities of the nether sea seemed to be gushing out of the crack with great momentum. However, these terrifying forces were now under human control and seemed to have become calm and peaceful. However, the deeper meaning of this made the hearts of Zhu Yin, the great sage of Yu Cheng, and the other great demons even heavier. Through the crack, a purple-clothed young man in a black robe could be vaguely seen. He looked heroic and heroic, sitting in the chaotic void of the nether sea. He was surrounded by the black, mysterious heaven tribulation flame and the bluish-purple nether evil light, like the Emperor of Flames. It was Yin, Emperor Shao Yin, the eldest disciple of the celestial sect Master Lin Feng. There seemed to be layers of fire jumping in Shao Yan's eyes, but his gaze was cold and devoid of warmth. He stared at Zhu Yin and the others. Looking at Shao Yin, the great sage of Yu Cheng, the great sage of extreme spirit, and the great sage of Bayan all felt a sense of fear. The human cultivator in front of them, not to mention his age, was indeed only in the realm of refining spirit to void, but he made them feel a sense of crisis when facing an expert in the Dharma-ending realm. In normal times, most cultivators in the realm of returning to void would not take them seriously in front of the great sage of Yu Cheng and the other 2 demons. But at this moment, facing Shao Yin, the great sage of Yu Cheng and the other 2 greater demons who had merged their astral souls as one, they actually felt a sense of dread rising from the depths of their hearts. To them, this was an extremely rare thing. But right now, it had truly happened. And the Shao Yin who gave them this feeling had a cultivation base that was even lower than theirs. In the great Tianyuan world, it was widely recognized that Xianmen Tianzong was a superior place for talented people. However, every time they faced the 4 heroes of the celestial sect, Shao Yin, Zhu Yi, Wang Lin, and Shi Tianhao, this feeling would be particularly strong. Even great Saint Zhu Yin had a feeling that Shao Yin, who was in the realm of refining spirit and returning to the void, was enough to pose a threat to him in the Dharma-ending realm. Especially when Shao Yin had opened the Nether Sea realm crack and could guide the power of the Nether Sea to descend upon this place at any time. Great Saint Zhu Yin was even more uncertain. Shao Yan's appearance here was clearly an ambush. He wouldn't release the eagle until he saw the rabbit. His target was the great sage of Yu Cheng and the others hiding behind the great demons. If great sage Zhu Yin didn't show up, he wouldn't show up either. The great Saint Zhu Yin had no idea what Xianmen Tianzong's arrangements were, so he could not help but feel uneasy. They already knew that there were experts of the dragon race approaching the heavenly desolation Emperor Shi Tianhao's heavenly desolation residence, which was also on the vast Tianwang mainland, to restrain Shi Tianhao, making it difficult for him to act rashly. However, apart from Heavenly Emperor Shi Tianhao, it was hard to guess what the other top experts of Xianmen Tianzong were doing at this time. Although many thoughts flashed through his mind, Great Saint Zhu Yan's reaction was not slow at all. When he saw Shao Yin, he said unhurriedly, "My children are a bit wild, so I'll take them back to discipline them. I've embarrassed myself in front of you, Emperor Yin." His tone was calm, but his movements did not slow down at all. His demonic power directly swept the great sage of Yu Cheng and the other 3 demons, and then his flame-like red limbs stepped on the void. His figure broke through the space of this world and retreated far away. Shao Yin did not come out of the Nether Sea and descend upon the vast thousand world. But as his mind moved, the Nether Sea crack that seemed to be a scar between heaven and earth suddenly expanded. A huge suction came from the crack, and thousands of fierce disasters turned into a huge whirlpool that kept spinning. Great Saint Zhu Yan's expression changed slightly. He had already revealed his true form, but he could still feel the huge suction. The Nether Sea crack was like the mouth of a giant beast about to swallow him. What really made Great Saint Zhu Yin frown was that the center of the whirlpool seemed to be where Shao Yin was. Can the power of the Nether Sea be used like this? In the center of the whirlpool, Shao Yin sat in the void, as if he was in a different time and space from the thousands of disasters around him. Behind him, there was a vague flash of fierce red brilliance, as if the source of the disasters. Great Saint Zhu Yin frowned. White, jade-like brilliance flowed on his body, and illusory crimson flames ignited on his limbs and feet. He stepped on the void, climbing higher and higher. With every step he took, he seemed to cross a layer of world. His movements did not seem as fierce and violent as the heavenly demonic apes leaped to the sky, but he won in endurance, which was good for long-distance travel. At this moment, every step he took was like stepping on invisible stairs. It seemed slow, but he actually broke free from the huge suction of the whirlpool of the Nether Sea. But Xiao Yin laughed, and then the whirlpool that swept up thousands of calamities and tribulations instantly reversed. Endless calamities and tribulations gushed out, and actually had a tendency to merge into one, turning into a colorful dim light pillar, shooting straight towards Zhu Yin. Wherever the light beam passed, the space was suddenly annihilated into nothingness, as if doomsday had come. Great Saint Zhu Yin looked solemn and serious. He stepped on the air, and his movements suddenly became a little more violent. The white jade-like brilliance around him became more majestic. It was not dazzling and bright, but as gentle as jade. However, it enveloped his huge body, making Great Saint Zhu Yin look like a white jade mountain. At the foot of this white jade mountain, a large number of crimson flames flickered, making Great Saint Zhu Yin look like a small mountain in the ancestral land of the Zhu Yin demonic ape. However, at this moment, this small mountain was constantly shaking, and the earth was shaking. Great Saint Zhu Yin wanted to fight a big battle with Xiao Yin. With the warriors of a dragon tribe holding him back, sure Tianhao wanted to help, but it was not completely without scruples. And the real body of the great sage was already rushing here, and he could descend at any time. Unless Lin Feng was still in the divine land and did not enter the spirit sea, or Xianli did not care about the possible threat of Yuan Dragon King, Great Saint Zhu Yin would not panic. But at this moment, he suddenly received a voice transmission from the great sage. Zhuri, retreat first. The situation has changed. Don't be impatient. Great Saint Zhu Yin was slightly stunned. From what the great sage said, it seemed that he did not intend to rush to Yin Emperor City. The situation is in our favor. Your long-cherished wish of flattening Mount Shu is just around the corner. The cold and majestic voice of the great sage continued. Retreat now. There is no need to entangle with Xianmin Tianzong anymore. We already know what we want to know. Now is not the time to compete with Xianmin Tianzong. His voice stopped here. Great Saint Zhu Yin frowned, but he chose to believe in the great sage. He looked up to the sky and roared, shaking all directions. Before the dark beam of light could reach him, Great Saint Zhu Yin twisted the space-time and seemed to slow down the beam of light. In fact, the light beam only seemed to slow down. At this moment, the space between Great Saint Zhu Yin and Xiao Yin was extended infinitely, becoming extremely far away, as if they could never reach each other. The dark light beam contained a powerful artistic conception. It traveled through space and time, almost ignoring the existence of space distance. But at this moment, there seemed to be a more ingenious way to manipulate space so that the dark light beam could not directly surpass it. This was the innate magic of the Zhu Yin demonic ape clan. Its control of the artistic conception of space was not inferior to that of the chaotic clan of the four primordial evils and the Hui dragon clan of the dragon clan. Great Saint Zhu Yin had reached the Dharma ending realm, and his control of the artistic conception of space had reached an astonishing height. But at this moment, his expression did not relax at all. Instead, it became more and more serious. Because although the speed of that dark pillar of light that Xiao Yin activated seemed to have slowed down, it was still continuously approaching him. According to Great Saint Zhu Yan's original intention, the space-time shift was to make the dark light beam not only unable to approach him, but also gradually move away. The subtlety of his manipulation of space could make the target close to him in an instant, and the distance between them would disappear. At the same time, he could make the target move away from him in an instant so that they would never meet again. But at this moment, the dark light beam was still chasing behind him like a maggot in the tarsal bone, and he could not get rid of it. The master of the celestial gate is famous for the way of spatial transformation. As his disciple, Xiao Yin, great Saint Zhu Yin was agitated. Among Lin Feng's personal disciples, Wang Lin, Shi Tianhao, and Yu Hongyan were the best at the changes of the artistic conception of space. Although Xiao Yin was not famous for it, his attainments in it were not shallow. At this moment, he was sitting in the underworld sea, activating the power of the underworld sea and integrating his own Tao power into it, making Great Saint Zhu Yin unable to ignore it. Great Saint Zhu Yin wanted to stop and simply fight with Xiao Yin, but there was a voice in his heart that warned him not to do so. The dark light beam was originally transformed by the underworld sea whirlpool, and Xiao Yin could control it at will. Once Great Saint Zhu Yin came into contact with it, the light beam instantly turned into a whirlpool again, sucking Great Saint Zhu Yin in. It would be difficult for him to escape, and he could only fight to the death with Xiao Yin. Therefore, although he was unwilling, Great Saint Zhu Yin did not look back. He flew all the way and went far away, and the dark light beam kept chasing Great Saint Zhu Yin, extending all the way into the distant void. It was thousands of miles away, and it did not stop for a long time. The place where Yin Emperor City had regained its peace. In the crack of the underworld sea above, Xiao Yan's expression did not change, but he frowned and thought, something is wrong with him running so resolutely. It is reasonable to say that the great sage should be on his way. Although Zhu Yin, the great sage's temperament, was not as fierce and violent as the omnipotent sage's, it was not a good temper either. In the end, he actually withdrew without even turning his head back. Even Xiao Yin felt that it was unexpected. After all, the primordial demonic ape clan wanted to test the strength of the divine land, but they were resolved by Xianmin Tianzong one after another, far from achieving their expected goal. The ancient emperor of the ancient dynasty, the overlord of the southern wilderness of the divine land, had moved to the region passage connecting the southern wilderness and the vast land of infinite wasteland, so that Shi Tianhao could leave the infinite wasteland villa and was now on his way to Yin Emperor City. But Xiao Yin believed that the great sage should also be on his way. Under such circumstances, Great Saint Zhu Yan's behavior of fleeing at the sight of the wind was really abnormal. This inevitably aroused Xiao Yan's vigilance. He was confident in his own strength and the strength of his sect, but he was not arrogant. Just as he was muttering to himself, his heart suddenly moved slightly. He felt that there was an unexpected change in the underworld sea where he lived. The violent underworld sea became more and more chaotic. Chapter 1401. Xiao Yin frowned slightly as he sensed the changes in the underworld sea. Ever since the end of the war between the two worlds, he had been living in the underworld sea and working hard to refine it. Although he was still a long way from success, he had undoubtedly gained a lot. Personally speaking, he was the person with the deepest understanding of the underworld sea after Wen Qiyong. And in this process, there have always been people creating obstructions for Xiao Yin. Xiao Yin has a rough idea in his heart who the obstructors are. It's not the first or second time he's had to go back and forth with them. But this time, the other party had caused a far greater commotion than before. It caused huge waves in the underworld sea, and even Xiao Yin had to deal with it seriously. And what concerned Xiao Yin was that the strange changes of the primordial demon ape race and the sudden chaos in the underworld sea were too coincidental. He could not help but have some guesses. Although he did not have a good impression of Taishu Temple, they would probably not collude with the demons at a critical juncture like the battle for the Spirit Sea. Taishu Temple's Grand Elder Wu Mengqi, who could draw on the power of the underworld sea, would definitely cause trouble for Xiao Yin in the process of refining the underworld sea. But this was a dispute between Xianmin Tianzong and Taishu Temple, and they would not rope in the demons. If the demons found out and invaded the divine land, Taishu Temple would also be threatened. The Haotian mirror's departure from White Cloud Mountain had caused a huge commotion that could not be hidden. Compared to Xianmen Tianzong, who still needed to test the waters, everyone knew that the Haotian mirror had entered the Spirit Sea. At this moment, Taishu Temple was even more vulnerable than Xianmen Tianzong. It might even become a target of the demons, like the Mount Shu Sword Sect and the Great Qin Dynasty. At the end of the day, the relationship between Taishu Temple and the powerful demons of Tianwang Vastland was also very bad. The king of the underworld, or Datshin Shaoyan furrowed his brows and remained silent. As he pondered, he communicated with the heavenly adversity in the netherworld sea to calm down the strange movements there. On the vast, infinite wasteland, the area where Yin Emperor City was located had regained its peace. Yin Emperor City was still standing tall on the land. However, the surrounding world had already been destroyed by the previous battle, and it looked desolate. The pulsation of the world's spiritual qi was also extremely chaotic. It would take a long time to recover before it could return to the right track. However, it was impossible to completely restore it to its previous state. In the process of recovery and adjustment, there would definitely be changes to harmonize with the dramatic changes in the weather. A battle between Great Sage Lu Yuan and Great Sage Peak City was enough to change the entire world. As for the battle between Xiao Yin, the Great Sage, Great Saint Zhuyin, and Lin Feng's Brontosaurus doppelganger, if it were not for them restraining and canceling each other out, it would have been enough to turn this place into nothingness. In the main hall of Yin Emperor City, Lin Tong, Duanmu Hong, and the others were sitting cross-legged. Long Shunke and Great Sage Lu Yuan, who had transformed into a human form, had also returned to the hall and were quietly resting. Not long after, the sky and earth in the distance broke open, and a tall young man stepped out. He walked on the vast land of infinite wasteland, looking even more ferocious than a great demon. It was Huang Tian Emperor Shi Tianhao. Shi Tianhao stepped on the void and came to the sky above Yin Emperor City, facing the huge crack in the netherworld sea. The crack in the space had been maintained like a door. At this moment, the various vicious disasters of the netherworld sea seemed to be under control and became calm. Inside the crack, Xiao Yin sat in the void. He seemed to be right in front of them, but also seemed to be far away. Seeing Shi Tianhao's arrival, Xiao Yin opened his eyes and said, "The changes in the netherworld sea and the sudden retreat of the primordial demon ape race seem to have something to do with it." Hearing him say this, Shi Tianhao raised his eyebrows slightly. So the people causing trouble in the netherworld sea are in cahoots with the demon race. Xiao Yin said, whether they are really in cahoots, and to what extent, is still uncertain. But at least they are communicating with each other. Perhaps they're using each other, borrowing each other's power. Shi Tianhao nodded and grinned. Let's see what kind of waves they can stir up. He paused slightly, then looked at Xiao Yin and continued. The divine continent's side has Aunt Xianli after all. On the contrary, eldest senior brother, the situation on your side might be a bit more complicated. Aunt Xianli can't enter the netherworld sea. As long as Xiao Yin did not completely control Heaven's Calamity and the netherworld sea, Heaven's Calamity would be extremely hostile to the Heaven-crushing sword. If Xuanli stepped into the netherworld sea, she would immediately be attacked by Heaven's Calamity. Regardless of victory or defeat, Xiao Yin, who was with Xuanli, would immediately be repelled by the netherworld sea, and all his previous efforts would be in vain. Although the principle was different from the spirit sea, the results were similar. Being in the netherworld sea, Xiao Yin had half the home field advantage. However, there were advantages and disadvantages. Among Xianmen Tianzong's many strongholds in the vast thousand domains, Xiao Yin in the netherworld sea was the only place that the heaven-crushing sword could not take care of. Of course, in the netherworld sea, Xiao Yan's strength was also far greater than when he was in the vast thousand domains. The Xiao Yin in this state, looking at the world, those who can pose a threat to him are also limited. Especially among these experts, a considerable portion have entered the spirit sea. Although Xiaohuang's and Blood River Daoist's evil souls have been destroyed, the king of the underworld still has Yin Xinghe's evil soul. Shi Tianhao said, back then, Yin Xinghe's evil soul and the king of the underworld were heavily injured by Master. However, according to Master, second senior brother, and third senior brother's deductions, the other party seems to have recovered. The ritual that the king of the underworld used to recover his cultivation was scrapped twice before and after the war between the two worlds. However, this old man is very good at hiding his strength. He has not made any movements over the years, and it is clear that he is biding his time and concentrating on accumulating his strength. No one knows if he has the ability to set up a third ritual, and no one knows to what extent his strength has recovered. Shi Tianhao said, if it was Taishu Temple's Wu Meng Qi or Shinazhe, it would be fine. However, if the king of the underworld and Yin Xinghe's evil soul enter the netherworld sea together, you will be under a lot of pressure, eldest senior brother. Xiaoyan smiled. It's fine, I can handle it. If the other party communicates with the demon race, then the demon race will know about the situation in the divine land sooner or later. The ape race probed us first, which means that they have formed an alliance with the dragon race. Tenryu Jin most likely has not entered the spiritual sea yet, and wants to take advantage of the vast thousand domains first. A huge battle is inevitable. Although Aunt Xuanli is here, the other party will definitely try to maneuver. Therefore, it is better for you to stay in the vast thousand domains. He looked at Shi Tianhao and said slowly, however, Master once said that your grandfather will return during the battle of the spiritual sea. If he returns on his own, then so be it. I'm afraid that he will return like your parents back then. Shi Tianhao's eyes flashed with ferocity. He said, now that everything is unknown, let's not think about it. Xiao Yin said, in any case, I will leave the divine land to you. You don't have to be distracted here at the netherworld sea. Shi Tianhao nodded his head lightly. Eldest senior brother, be careful. Xiao Yin laughed loudly. Let's see who will come to die this time. Hearing this, Shi Tianhao also laughed loudly. Slowly, the crack in the netherworld sea closed, and Xiao Yan's figure disappeared among the layers of calamities. Just continue to defend Yin Emperor City. After bidding farewell to Xiao Yan, Shi Tianhao landed in Yin Emperor City. Looking at Lin Tong, Long Shenke, and Lu Yuan, he said, the other party invaded Yin Emperor City to test our strength. Although the reason is unknown, it seems that they have achieved their goal. From now on, they will most likely not invade our cave abode again. But just in case, you all should stay here. Hearing Shi Tianhao's instructions, Lin Tong and the others nodded in agreement. After the test just now achieved the expected goal, after the real battle, facing the situation that the heaven-punishing sword was destined to not enter the spiritual sea, without sufficient confidence, no great demon would fight to the death with the celestial sect of wonders. The real targets of the demon race were the Shushan sword sect, the Qin dynasty, and other factions. Moreover, the main battlefield of the demon race's chaos would definitely be the divine land. Although Infinite Wasteland was the world of the demon race, in the middle of the battle, the top declining great demons would not care at all. Great sages of the demon race like Yu Cheng and Great Spirit Sage, who had merged their star souls into one, might not attack. With a decisive victory in the divine land, the territories that Shushan, Great Qin, and other factions had occupied in Infinite Wasteland would naturally fall by themselves. The same logic applied to Yin Emperor City and other places. Even if the enemy wanted to attack Xianmen Tianzong, their targets would be Yujing Mountain and Ing Ocean, which were the real key areas. Because the Mystic Sky treasure trees will had fully returned, Yujing Mountain remained hidden in the void, even though Linfeng was not there. Ing Ocean, on the other hand, might become the main target of the big demons. Although Ing Ocean was strong, it was still unknown how much power it could exert without Lin Feng's presence. Once they succeeded, they would undoubtedly gain the most. Ing Ocean, one of the 7 seas of Tianyuan, was coveted by everyone. In the consideration of Xiao Yin and the others, If the Emperor of the Underworld took the opportunity to cause trouble, it was very likely that he would create a diversion and instead target the Ing Sea. This was also the direction they were on guard against. However, the first to feel the pressure from the demon race experts were undoubtedly the other sects and factions in the Divine Land. The Great Sage, Zhu Yin the Great Sage, Tian Long Kun, and Tian Long Shun. A total of 4 declining great demons passed through the domain passage at the same time and entered the Divine Land, bringing an omen of doomsday to the human cultivation world. The current ancient Emperor Gujun, who was in the southern border, could only temporarily retreat. The arrival of the top experts of the Dragon Tribe and the Ape Tribe also caused the Mount Shu Sword Sect in the Western Shu Land and the Qin Dynasty in the north to feel great pressure. At the moment, the only thing that could make them feel relatively safe was Xian Li, who was sitting cross-legged in the sky above the wilderness at the intersection of the Great Zhou Dynasty and the Great Qin Dynasty, as if there was no one else around. However, on the other side, at the domain passage above the EC that connected to Infinite Wasteland, there was also an aura that was more powerful than that of the Great Sage, Tian Long Kun, and the other great demons. The entire Divine Land seemed to be facing a cruel winter at this moment. Chapter 1402. As soon as Shi Tianhao returned to the Divine Land, he received messages from the other powers. He didn't have to ask to know that the shocking demonic aura at the entrance of the realm passage connecting the East Sea to Infinite Wasteland most likely belonged to the current master of the dragon race, the great demon who was going through the calamity period, Yuan Dragon King. In the past, before the Yudu race had returned, when King Yuan Dragon was still in the Dharma Ending Realm, he was already known as the strongest great demon of the Dharma Ending Realm. Other than the monkey, who was hard to find after the Middle Era, the other great demons of the Dharma Ending Realm, including the Kunlun Dragon King, the master of the ape race, and the great sage of overreaching heaven, all agreed that King Yuan Dragon was the strongest demon of the Dharma Ending Realm in the boundless world after the war between the two worlds ended 4,000 years ago. Before that, the dragon race spent most of their time cultivating in the Xian Sea. As the master of the dragon race, Yuan Dragon King blocked the news and successfully went through the calamity period. If it wasn't for Lin Feng stirring up a storm in Infinite Wasteland after the Battle of Mount Shu, the people of the Great Heaven Primordial World wouldn't have known that Yuan Dragon King had successfully improved. When the war between the two worlds broke out, he unexpectedly recovered from his weakened state in advance. Unfortunately, just like the Yudu race that had returned to the boundless world, Yuan Dragon King met Lin Feng head-on. The Heaven Punishment Sword's second seal was successful, and it was unsealed. Lin Feng said that as long as he was in the boundless world, Yuan Dragon King wasn't allowed to leave the Xian Sea. Otherwise, he would kill him. To the proud dragon race, this was undoubtedly a great humiliation, but Yuan Dragon King could only endure it. Today, the master of the Xian Sea, the king of the dragon race, finally stepped into the boundless world again. However, Yuan Dragon King didn't feel proud at all. This was because the master of the Xian Gate, Lin Feng, had left the boundless world and gone to the Spirit Sea. To some extent, this made Yuan Dragon King feel even more humiliated. However, he didn't advance rashly. He didn't even enter the Divine Land through the Realm Passage. Instead, he stayed in Infinite Wasteland. Although Lin Feng himself had left the vast thousand domains and headed for the Spirit Sea, the terrifying heaven-punishing sword that struck fear into the hearts of all the demon clans was still hanging high above the Divine Land. However, the Yuan Dragon King's demonic energy was still faintly discernible. It passed through the passageway between the two worlds and shook the Divine Land. At this moment, the EC was filled with strong winds and strong waves. Torrential rain was falling, and tsunamis were breaking out continuously. Even though they were separated by a world, the might of the Yuan Dragon King still shocked the human cultivation world in the Divine Land. In the vast land of the Divine Prefecture, at the border between the Great Zhou and the Great Qin, Xian Li sat in the void above the wilderness. Her face was expressionless as she looked in the direction of the East Sea, her eyes cold and emotionless. She, who had been sitting motionlessly all this time, finally stood up and walked in the void. She crossed the territory of the Great Zhou dynasty and arrived above the Eastern Sea. When Xianli crossed the coast and arrived at the surface of the East Sea, the storm immediately subsided. There seemed to be an invisible boundary on the surface of the sea. Behind Xianli, the wind and waves were calm, but in front of her, there was a storm and huge waves. However, as Xianli moved forward, the wind and rain in front of her kept receding. The roaring sea also returned to its calm state, and the moving crust and volcanoes at the bottom of the sea also calmed down. At the other end of the passageway between the two worlds above the Eastern Sea, the Yuan Dragon King's aura became even more ethereal, as if he was about to disappear. However, the Yuan Dragon King didn't really leave. He was also paying attention to Xian Li's movements. The location that the Yuan Dragon King chose was also quite thought-provoking. The entrance to the Ying Sea that was controlled by Xianmin Tianzong was also above the Eastern Sea. If there was no one to stop him, he would probably directly enter the Ying Sea and cause a scene. With his strength and Lin Feng's absence, there were others guarding the Ying Sea. If the Yuan Dragon King barged in, no one would be able to take it lightly. The leader of the Dragon Clan restrained his arrogance when facing the sharpness of the heaven-punishing sword. The main purpose of his trip was to use himself as bait to restrain Xian Li and create an opportunity for the Kuan Dragon King and the Shen Dragon King. In this battle, the top experts of the Dragon Clan all left the Xian Sea and came to the Colossal World. If Xian Li gave up on him to fight the Kuan Dragon King and the others, the Yuan Dragon King wouldn't mind attacking the Divine Land instead. His destructive power was something that the human cultivators couldn't ignore. However, the Yuan Dragon King was also very afraid of Xian Li, so he didn't dare to go too far. If Xian Li took the initiative to attack and focused on killing him, the Yuan Dragon King would simply retreat or even return to the Xian Sea. As soon as he felt Xian Li's sword will, he immediately retreated. If he really came face to face with her, it would be extremely difficult for him to retreat safely even with the Xian Sea ritual. He didn't want to end the battle with Xian Li in a short period of time. That would give Xian Li a chance to return and deal with the Kuan Dragon King and the others. Although he was humiliated because of Lin Feng to the Yuan Dragon King, the existence that he hated the most was still the immortal dragon city of the Qin dynasty. The immortal dragon city of the past was now Shi Xingyun. It wasn't just the Yuan Dragon King's personal honor, but the shame of the entire dragon tribe. This time, the elites of the dragon tribe had come out in full force. Their main goal was to kill Shi Xingyun and destroy the Qin dynasty. Shi Tianhao knew what the Yuan Dragon King was thinking when he heard the Yuan Dragon King's plan. He gritted his teeth and said, "This is because of the Xian Sea ritual. He and the Kuan and Shun dragons can return to the Xian Sea at any time. Otherwise, I would have taken drastic measures against you. You keep an eye on the Ying Sea of our sect, and Master Shi Tianhao will go to the Xian Sea of the Dragon Tribe. I want to see how much the Xian Sea of the Dragon Tribe, who has achieved the unification of the stars and souls, can activate, and see if they can stop me." Shi Tianhao let out a long sigh, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. Bad news came one after another. The four great demons of the age of cultivation declining, which belonged to the Dragon Tribe and the Ape Tribe, did not split up to find their own enemies. Instead, they rushed to Mount Shu together. Four great demons in the Dharma-ending realm attacked the Mount Shu sword sect together. The hearts of the human cultivators, including the higher-ups of the great Qin dynasty, sank when they heard the news. Emperor Shizongtong and the others did not feel relieved at all. Instead, they felt even more depressed, because this meant that the Dragon Tribe and the primordial Demon Ape Tribe had really formed an alliance this time. It was not just a simple cooperation, but an alliance of advancing and retreating together. They chose to attack the Mount Shu sword sect first because it was closer to the Divine Land than to the West Hill City. The four demons of the cultivation declining stage joined forces with a large number of demon cultivators under their command. They formed a terrifying wave, intending to flatten Mount Shu first, and then the West Hill City. The Kuan Dragon King and the Shun Dragon King were not worried that the Great Sage and the Great Sage Yu Yin would just leave after the attack on Mount Shu, because both they and the ape tribe had to rely on the Yuan Dragon King to contain Xianli. The Yuan Dragon King, who came out of the Xian Sea during the Middle Tribulation, was the foundation and guarantee of the alliance. Once the two powerful demon tribes joined forces, the situation would be more favorable for them when the war officially started. They would attack the Mount Shu Sword Sect and the West Hill City respectively. No matter how the human cultivators were divided or how they would reinforce, the Dragon Tribe and the Ape Tribe would have to face the two major forces of the human cultivation world separately. Now that the demon tribes had joined forces, even if all the cultivators of the Great Qin dynasty were mobilized to reinforce the Mount Shu Sword Sect with all the cultivators of the human tribe, the geographical advantage of the West Hill City would not be of any use. Sometimes, the balance of victory and defeat was only a matter of a single line. If a decisive change happened in one corner of the war, it could affect other aspects and ultimately determine the direction of the whole situation. Shi Tianhao crushed a voice crystal. Sister Xingyun, the situation has changed. I'm afraid you'll have to go to Mount Shu with us. At this moment, Gu Jun had already taken the longevity lotus throne to West Shu. Compared to Xianmin, Tianzong, Taishu Temple, Mount Shu Sword Sect, and the Great Qin dynasty, the ancient emperor's bloodline, which had not appeared in the world for many years, did not have a deep conflict with the demon tribes. It was all left over from the ancient times, but Gu Jun still went to Mount Shu Sword Sect without hesitation. Xianmin, Tianzong, and the top cultivators of Taishu Temple had all gone to the spiritual sea. The divine land was empty, and the ancient dynasty had become one of the most important forces of the human cultivation world. At this critical moment, the ancient dynasty mobilized its forces and rushed to West Shu to tide over the calamity of the divine land. If Xianmin, Tianzong, the ancient dynasty, and the other forces did not come to help, the Mount Shu Sword Sect would probably be crushed by the attacks of the four great demons of the Age of Cultivation. The same principle applied to the Great Qin dynasty. If they split their forces and were defeated one by one, the Kunlong King, the Great Sage, and the other demons would sweep across the divine land like a thunderbolt. An elegant voice came from the other side of Shi Tianhao's voice transmission. It was Shi Xingyun. Don't worry, Tianhao. I'm already on my way. Regardless of the outcome, it would be more beneficial for the Great Qin dynasty if they could end the battle in Mount Shu, as West Hill City would not be threatened. Therefore, not only Shi Xingyun, but the other high-level cultivators of the Great Qin dynasty were also heading to Mount Shu to help. Moreover, Shi Xingyun's relationship with Xianmin, Tianzong, and the others had become better over the years. In terms of bloodline, Shi and Shi Tianhao were distant relatives. However, Shi Tianhao had always addressed her politely in the past, just like how Shi Tianhao treated the Great Qin dynasty. At the moment, Shi Tianhao's impression of the Great Qin dynasty had not changed much. However, his relationship with Shi Xingyun had improved a lot in recent years. Since Shi Xingyun had been reborn, she had spent a lot of time cultivating in the desolate ancient Star Ocean through the Star Ocean Gate of Xianmin Tianzong, which had benefited her a lot. Even without the Great Qin dynasty, she would still go to Mount Shu at Shi Tianhao's invitation. For a while, the divine land was in turmoil, and the world was shaking. The Mount Shu Sword Sect, which had been sealed for many years, seemed to have gradually faded out of everyone's sight, except for a brief appearance during the war between the two worlds. At this moment, it became the focus of the divine land again. However, such an encounter was not something to be happy about for the people of the Mount Shu Sword Sect. This was especially so when the figures of the four great demons of the Age of Cultivation, the Great Sage Kunlong King, Shun Dragon King, and Great Sage Zhu Yin, broke through the void and descended on Mount Shu together. The terrifying pressure made the world change color. Chapter 14:03. The mountains of West Shu, which had been sunny just a moment ago, were now covered with dark clouds, and the sun could not be seen for thousands of miles. The entire Mount Shu sword sect was in a depressing atmosphere. When they received the news that the primordial demonic ape tribe was trying to attack Yin Emperor's city, they already had a bad feeling. Just in case, the younger disciples with lower cultivation were sent to other places to avoid being affected by the war. But when the demon tribe really came, the terrible situation still made everyone's heart heavy. Other than Zhu Yin the Great Sage, Tong Tian the Great Sage also came along. What was worse was that apart from the two of them, Kunlun Dragon King and Shin Dragon King also came. 4 great demons of the declining age attacked together. Even before the Battle of Mount Shu, when the Fairy Heaven Sword and the Great Immortal Nature Sword formation were still there, the Mount Shu sword sect would not be safe, not to mention the current situation. In the dark sky, the first thing that could be seen were 4 crimson flames. Wherever the flames passed, the void distorted and became chaotic. The shapeless void condensed into a flight of stairs that seemed to have substance. The 4 crimson flames fell on it, and the flames burned fiercely. A white jade-like luster appeared on the stairs, forming a huge body that looked like a white jade mountain. It was Great Saint Zhuyan. Zhuyan's red eyes flashed with cyan ferocity. He stared expressionlessly at the peaks of Mount Shu below. During the Middle Era, the cultivators of the Mount Shu sword sect plotted to seize the Red Refinement Fire Copper Mine on Mount Xiaozi, but they were killed by the Great Saint Zhuyan. Later, the sword ancestor, Run Changmei, killed the Great Saint Zhu Yin as revenge. Later, the sword ancestor, Run Changmei, was killed by the extreme Emperor Divine Abyss. At this point, the hatred between the two sides did not end. Instead, it continued. From the Middle Era to the present, the Zhu Yin demonic ape tribe and the Mount Shu sword sect had fought with each other from time to time. Clansmen and cultivators of different cultivation levels were killed or injured, and the hatred grew deeper and deeper. The Zhu Yin demonic ape tribe had always been one of the strongest among the primordial demonic ape tribe. After a long time of development, the entire tribe had not been on good terms with the Mount Shu sword sect. At this moment, there was no anger or hatred in Zhu Yan's eyes. There was only indifference and coldness, revealing an even more terrifying will to exterminate. On the other side of the sky, the thick black fog billowed, and an existence even more terrifying than the Great Saint Zhu Yin emerged. Black smoke billowed from the huge, pitch-black body. He did not make any gestures, but he seemed to have the power to pierce through the heavens and the earth. His scarlet eyes stared coldly at Shushan. It was the current leader of the ape race, the Great Sage. In front of the Great Sage, the dark clouds and black fog that filled the sky suddenly dispersed. Golden light shone, dispelling the darkness, and a powerful majesty was revealed. 2 clouds of golden dragon might appeared. One was dignified and domineering, while the other was vigorous and heavy. Both of them exuded the majestic aura of the primordial heavenly dragon, suppressing the surroundings. It made all living beings involuntarily have the thought of prostrating themselves in worship, nearly submitting without fighting. The golden light and the black fog each occupied half of the sky, but they did not confront each other. Instead, they jointly formed a domain-like existence, shrouding the mountains of West Shu, almost isolating it from the world. Within each of the 2 balls of golden, auspicious clouds, an enormous heavenly dragon of unknown length could be faintly seen floating and swimming within the clouds. The golden scales on their bodies were dazzling and resplendent, and they illuminated the heavens and the earth. But under the concealment of the auspicious clouds, it was difficult to discern their true forms, and the head of the dragons could be seen but not their tails. Everyone knew that they were the 2 experts of the Dharma ending period of the dragon race, the Kunlun Dragon King and the Shin Dragon King. For great demons of the Dharma ending period had descended on Shushan. Just the gathering of the demonic aura made Shushan feel like it was in a storm. After the successive Battle of Shushan and the War of the Two Realms, Shushan Sword Sect had suffered a great disaster. The current Mountain Gate Cave was rebuilt again after the War of the Two Realms. There was no time for the sword chi and sword will to accumulate. At this moment, under the pressure of the demonic aura of Zhu Yin and the other great demons, the mountain even began to gradually crack, as if it was about to collapse. The newly set-up mountain guarding formation had already been activated, turning into beams of sword chi and soaring into the sky. But it looked like a lonely boat in the raging waves. At this time, on the top of the main peak of Shushan, bright sword light suddenly rose, and the sound of swords shook the sky. The sword light, like stars, rose slowly from the top of the mountain, bright and dazzling. After the first star, more and more sword stars rose, turning into a distant river of stars, rushing into the sky. The tall figure of the Big Dipper swordsman stood on the top of Shushan, looking calm and resolute. Silently, he looked at the demon experts who were pressing down on the border. Without saying a word, he waved his hand, and the Big Dipper ancient sword fell into his palm. With the tip of the sword, the heavenly river formed by the sword light crossed in front of him, and the sword will pointed at Zhu Yin and the great sage. Although the enemy before him was powerful enough to destroy the current Shushan sword sect with ease, Big Dipper swordsman had no intention of retreating. One man, one sword, one battle. Behind him, the current sect master of the Shushan sword sect, Jiwen Rui, was sitting cross-legged, surrounded by Ji1 Rui. At present, the sword masters and grandmasters of the various sword branches of Shushan were also sitting on the ground. Everyone was performing sword incantations and activating their sword will to strengthen the Mountain Gate formation. Without the sword formation of the great immortal heaven and the sword formation of primordial beginning, there was almost no room for them to intervene in the current battle. But Jiwen Rui and the others still tried their best to activate their sword will to strengthen the sword formation, and then guided the power of the sword formation to Big Dipper swordsman. Both the Great Sage and Zhu Yin looked at Big Dipper swordsman coldly. On the other side, the voice of the Kuan Dragon King came from the Golden Dragon auspicious cloud. Finish this quickly. Before his voice trailed off, Zhu Yan's huge body had already pressed down on the sky above Shushan. He let out a low growl and directly revealed his true form. The space where Shushan was suddenly began to distort violently. Layers of space barriers enveloped the mountains of Western Shu and Big Dipper swordsmen. As Zhu Yin trampled the void with his four claws, the overlapping space began to compress toward the center. It was as if this part of the world had become an ink painting, and then it was being forcefully rubbed by someone from the outside world. Everything was distorted and broken. The Great Sage also reached out his claw and clenched it into a fist, then smashed it down on Big Dipper swordsman's head. As the fist smashed down, the sky above Shushan seemed to collapse. The Kuan Dragon King and Shun Dragon King were not idle either. Their huge dragon heads peeked out from the golden, auspicious cloud, looking down at the Shushan sword sect with dignity and indifference. Shin Dragon King's eyes flashed slightly. He suddenly retracted his dragon head into the golden dragon auspicious cloud and floated in the opposite direction. The expressions of the Kuan Dragon King, the Great Sage, and Zhu Yin Great Sage didn't change at all. In the void far away, an elegant white lotus suddenly appeared. Dense waves of spiritual chi spread out, vast and endless. On the center of the white lotus sat a majestic emperor. He wore a dragon robe and a crown on his head. He was the current ancient emperor, Gujun. He merged with the longevity lotus beneath him, manifesting rays of spiritual light that illuminated the world. In the light, many white lotuses rose up and down, and the distant celestial music lingered, making the whole world seem like a paradise of longevity, an ideal hometown, and people couldn't help but want to be immersed in it. The endless paradise seemed to be eternal and auspicious, not falling into the mundane world, and it made people's hearts tremble. The white spiritual light collided with the golden dragon auspicious cloud around Shun Dragon King. The white spiritual light rippled like water and shattered, and the golden auspicious cloud also dissipated. Gu Jun sat on the longevity lotus and formed a seal with both of his hands. The longevity lotus shone brightly, and the white spiritual light condensed, turning into an even bigger lotus platform with 18 giant petals. At the same time, the scene in the sky became more and more brilliant. White lotuses fell from the sky and floated along with the clear air. Countless white lotuses suddenly turned into a sea of lotuses, enveloping Shun Dragon King. As the golden light around him shone, it was blocked by the white lotuses. One white lotus disappeared, and two rose, as if there was no end. Shun Dragon King looked up and saw Gu Jun and the giant white lotus floating in the middle of the sea of flowers like a lone island in the sea. But when he wanted to get closer to Gu Jun and the longevity lotus, he realized that there were many white lotuses rising in front of him, and they became denser and denser. Gu Jun and the longevity lotus disappeared in the sea of flowers and were covered by billions of white lotuses. Although this was the first time Shun Dragon King fought with Gu Jun using the Tao of the ancient emperor, in the ancient era, the ancestors of the dragon race had fought with the ancient emperor who ruled the world in the ancient era, so they had some understanding of the primordial Tao of longevity. He knew that the method Gu Jun and the longevity lotus used together was similar to the Buddhist kingdom in the Palm Grand Divine Power of the Buddhist sect. The white lotuses in front of him were completely different from the Buddhist Adumbra flower in the Buddhist sect, but they both had the essence of the flower blooming. If he couldn't break the sea of flowers, Shun Dragon King wouldn't be able to escape, let alone hurt Gu Jun and the longevity lotus. His strength is definitely not as good as Gu Changsheng in the ancient era, but why do I feel that his method is more exquisite than the rumors? Is it because Gu Changsheng's descendants have surpassed him, or is the rumor true? Is the master of the celestial gate giving a speech and secretly helping us? Although he was temporarily trapped, Shun Dragon King didn't panic at all. Regardless of the outcome, he was confident that he could break the method in front of him. However, he had many doubts in his mind. The more he thought about it, the more he felt his blood run cold. Shun Dragon King was even less worried about the situation on Mount Shu. Without the celestial heaven sword and the geographical advantage, no matter how unyielding the Tiangang sword venerable was, he wouldn't be able to withstand the attacks of the three grand demons of the age of cultivation, the great sage, Kunlong King, and Zhu Yan. At this moment, on Mount Shu, Kunlong King looked down at the mountain coldly. He didn't attack with the great sage and Zhu Yan. But even so, the dazzling sword-like galaxy above the main peak of Mount Shu was on the verge of collapse at this moment. While resisting the attack of Zhu Yan Great Saint, it was no longer able to take care of the omnipotent sage. The sword light was smashed into pieces by the omnipotent sage's punch. However, right at that moment, the omnipotent saint and the Kunlong King frowned slightly and looked up. In the sky above Mount Shu, a crack suddenly appeared, and a strong light shot down from it. Chapter 1404. Above Mount Shu, the vault of heaven opened, and dazzling light shone down, falling directly on the main peak of Mount Shu like a heavenly pillar, piercing the sky and the earth. It was clearly a sword light, dazzling and breathtaking. The sword within it was not very sharp, but there seemed to be a large number of lights and shadows in the sword light, as if there was a world. Everyone looked up and saw the opening in the vault of heaven, the lights surging. Looking inside, the layers of light and shadows became clearer. There seemed to be a reflection of the boundless world in it, facing the real divine land below. A figure walked out of the light. He was dressed in cyan and had ordinary features, but his eyes were shining and as sharp as a sword. Ji Wenrui and the others saw this scene, and they were all excited. The newcomer was the former sect leader of Mount Shu Sword Sect, Xian Longsheng, who had been traveling far away, missing, and rarely heard from. the heavenly reaching great sage, and the great sage of Zhu Yin looked at Exine Longsheng coldly. To them, Exine Longsheng was just a junior. During the Battle of Shushan, he had just experienced the first tribulation. At this moment, Exine Longsheng's strength was higher than before, but decades were not enough for him to completely pass the first tribulation and enter the Dharma-ending realm. But the sword will around Exine Longsheng was bursting, showing a strange aura that the great sage and Zhu Yin, who had dealt with many times with the Mount Shu sword sect, felt strange. It seemed to be the same as the celestial sword qi of Mount Shu, but the great sage and Zhu Yin could clearly distinguish the difference between them. It seemed to be a new kind of swordsmanship, different from the sword will that Exine Longsheng had cultivated all his life. Swordsmanship could be practiced at the same time, but the swordsmanship of achieving the way and the method of proving the primordial spirit were not so easy to change, especially for someone with Exine Longsheng's cultivation. It was almost impossible to start all over again. Even if he could, it would mean that his previous years of hard work would go down the drain, and he would have to start all over again. How could it be achieved in just over 20 years in the mortal world? Ji Wenrui and the others from the Shushan sword sect knew more about this. Even when Exine Longsheng had returned to the sect, he was still at the bottom of the heavenly, immortal sword qi. At that time, although there had been some changes, they had only been vague thoughts. It was not like now, where he had been reborn. What made Ji Wenrui and the others even more excited was that the item that Exine Longsheng had secretly taken away had returned to Shushan with him today, and was similarly reborn. What concerned the great sage, Zhu Yin, and Kunlong King the most was Exine Longsheng's right hand. At this moment, Exine Longsheng's right hand clearly held a longsword. Its entire body was like jade, and the edge of the sword was not sharp, but seemed to be able to cut through the heavens and earth. With the sword in hand, Exine Longsheng felt like he was holding a world of creation. However, it was still a broken sword. The tip of the sword was neat, and the fracture was smooth. This broken white jade sword was clearly the first sword of the heavenly origin realm, the treasure of Shushan Town, the immortal heaven sword. At this moment, the immortal heaven sword looked like it had not recovered its original appearance, but the power and intent realm within it attracted the attention of everyone present. The magnificent power and intent realm that could split the heavens and the earth affected the surroundings, shaking the real divine land of the vast thousand worlds. The sword qi extended along the sky in all directions, and the whole world seemed to have become a giant sword that could split the heavens at this moment. At the fracture of the immortal heaven sword, there was a colorless stream of light that kept flowing and turning into an invisible sharpness. This stream of light became a part of the blade and became the sharpest existence on the entire immortal heaven sword. Wherever the blade reached, the tip of the sword seemed to be indestructible, able to break through everything that stood in its way. Even if it was the creation of chaos, it could still be pierced by the sword and split the heavens and the earth. Although it was an invisible blade, it was even sharper than the visible white jade sword. It attracted the sword intent of the vast thousand worlds, and the sword intent and sword qi of the immortal heaven sword converged on the tip of the sword, making it look extremely terrifying. At this moment, the sharpness of the sword in Exine Longsheng's hand was no less than the immortal heaven sword of the past, but it was not the reincarnation of the Emperor of Swords of the immortal heaven sword. Inside the sword formed by the invisible stream of light, there were many different phenomena. Compared to the immortal heaven sword of the past, there were many more possibilities. The great Tao moved forward together, indicating the possibility of advancing further. Exine Longsheng raised the sword, and as the blade rose, the thousands of swords in the divine land began to vibrate at this moment. Endless sword qi began to gather toward Shu Mountain and the sword in Exine Longsheng's hand. These sword qi were not absorbed by the sword in Exine Longsheng's hand. Instead, under the guidance of the invisible sword at the tip of the sword, they rose together. With the invisible sword as the core, they supported each other and became stronger and stronger. Thousands of sword chi gathered and formed a great intent that could split the heavens and the earth. It cut through all obstacles and broke through all obstacles. Above Shu Mountain, the sword chi of all the swordsmen of Shu Mountain, including the Big Dipper sword Venerable, also rose together with the invisible sword. They went forward together to meet the group of grand demons in front of them. Xian Longsheng said, "The immortal heaven will face the tribulation, and creation will be destroyed. Today, we will break the chaos and open the world again." This sword is called Sky Splitting. Xian Longsheng's voice was like a great bell, shaking the void. At this moment, it resounded throughout the land of West Shu and spread far above the vast divine land. Above the divine land, in the mountain gates of the heavenly sword sect, the Thunderbolt sword sect, the celestial sword sect, the Songhai sword sect, the wilderness sword sect, and other sword sects, the leaders of the heavenly sword sect, such as the Thunderbolt sword sect, the celestial sword sect, and the wilderness sword sect, were also looking in the direction of Shu Mountain. Seeing that the sword chi of the world once again gathered at Shu Mountain, the heavenly sword Venerable and the others did not surrender this time, but they did not show any hostility or dissatisfaction. Instead, they fell into silence and looked at Shu Mountain with complicated expressions. The invisible sword at the top of the sky, splitting sword in Xian Longsheng's hand, kept spinning. At this moment, the entire boundless world seemed to have turned into a boundless blade, pointing at the invading the Great Sage Zhu Yin, and Kunlong King. Shu Mountain, and Big Dipper, sword Venerable on the mountain. The sword chi and sword were one at this moment. With Shu Mountain as the core, it seemed that the whole body had turned into a sword blade. Then it drew the boundless spiritual chi of the world and turned it into its own sword edge, slashing toward the Great Sage and the other grand demons. The Great Sage and Great Sage Zhu Yin both frowned slightly. Great Sage Zhu Yin looked at Xian Longsheng and said, "At the same level of cultivation, you are better than your master and Big Dipper. Your Shu Mountain was defeated by the sword of the Xianmen sect master, but you rose from the ashes. Good, very good." His eyes finally fell on the sky, splitting sword, and his voice was cold. "I regret not being able to destroy your Shu Mountain immortal celestial sword with my own hands. Fortunately, today, I have the opportunity to destroy the hope of your Shu Mountain's revival. I have knocked you down from the clouds twice, and I think it will make you collapse in despair." Great Sage Zhu Yin looked up to the sky and roared, "In this way, I can't be happier." In the roar, Great Sage Zhu Yin, who had been standing in the void with his 4 feet, stood up at this moment. The crimson flames on his 2 front claws suddenly turned green. In the green flames, there were even specks of starlight emerging. One after another, stars rose and fell in the green demonic fire. The fire and the starlight merged into one, causing the nearby time and space to distort and fracture. His 2 giant claws put their 10 fingers together, crossed their fists, and then smashed toward Xian Longsheng and Big Dipper sword Venerable together. With this smash, the green demonic fire exploded. The whole world where Shu Mountain was suddenly like a broken porcelain, full of cracks, and then shattered, turning into a pitch-black void. At this moment, Great Sage Zhu Yin struck with all his strength. The boundless world of the divine land was shaken, and the realm cracks also appeared at the same time. The movements of the people of Shu Mountain who were in this world seemed to collectively freeze for a moment. It was not that they didn't want to move, but this blow from Great Sage Zhu Yin had frozen the entire time in an instant, so that the other side could not respond or escape. At this moment, they were completely destroyed. But in this instant, the eyeballs of Xian Longsheng and Big Dipper sword Venerable moved at the same time, and the invisible sword edge at the top of the sky-opening sword also flowed with brilliance. Next, they saw a sword slash down, and the frozen time and space began to move again at this moment, and everything became alive again. Wherever the sword light passed, it seemed to open up a new world for the human world, so that the scene of the collapse of the doomsday no longer existed. The rolling sword light cut through the thistles and thorns, invincible. It split the void, split the demon aura, split the green demonic fire, and went all the way to great sage Zhu Yan. At the source of the sword light, above Shu Mountain, a figure seemed to appear in the void. It was an old man in linen with a white beard and white hair. When great sage Zhu Yan saw him, he let out a shocking roar. Rin Changmei. The old man in linen was the founder of the Shu Mountain Sword Sect, a giant of the divine land, sword ancestor Rin Changmei. The old man held a long sword in his hand and stabbed it out. It seemed that the world was being split open, and the sword momentum did not stop. It rolled forward and covered the divine land. Later, the sword momentum went round and round, becoming perfect. But at this moment, the light and shadow of the old man in linen suddenly broke, and a new sword light rushed out, as if cutting the world and opening up the world again. And this sword had the same wonderful effect as the old man's first sword move. This sword, both destroyed and built, carried on the past and opened up the future, but also returned to the origin and set things right. The beginning and end of the great path was mysterious. Seeing this scene, the great sage snorted slightly and gritted his teeth. His violent chi and blood and demonic power vibrated together, and his body kept expanding, becoming bigger and bigger, and began to show his original real body. The huge black body, like a demon god, and the two blood-red star-like eyes stared coldly at Xian Longsheng, Celestial Gang, Sword Venerable, and the sky-opening sword. The majestic power of tearing the void of heaven and earth was revealed with every move, more violent and overbearing than great sage Zhu Yan. He suddenly took a step forward, stood in front of great sage Zhu Yan, and smashed his fists toward the peaks of Shu Mountain. Even if the great sage did not block or avoid the sharp sword light that could split heaven and earth, he would not be able to get away with it. But at this moment, in the face of the sword light of the sky-opening sword that was stabbing him, the great sage seemed to completely ignore it. If you stab me with your sword, I will smash your entire Shu Mountain. On the main peak of Shu Mountain, Xian Longsheng had already landed on the top of the mountain, standing side by side with Celestial Gang Sword Venerable. Ji Wenrui and other Shu Mountain cultivators also stood up and stood behind them. As the tip of the sky-opening sword guided them, all the Shu Mountain cultivators struck their swords together. The sword light continued to move forward in a straight and fearless manner, unwavering, and attacked the great sage. Chapter 1405. The violent power of the great sage smashed down. The world where the peaks of Shushan did not collapse directly. Instead, it seemed to be separated from the divine land of the boundless world, and then it shrank infinitely, collapsing toward a single point. The vast sword light was even more sharp and ferocious. It cut through the extremely powerful demon body of the great sage after he revealed his true form, and a large amount of demon blood permeated the void. The peaks of Shushan collapsed, and everyone on the mountain also staggered. Their bodies shook violently, and their auras dimmed. Xian Longsheng's face was as pale as paper. His body swayed, and his primordial spirit barely maintained its human form. However, the hand holding the heaven-opening sword did not waver at all, and the blade was still pointing forward. After today, Shushan will either be completely destroyed or reborn. Life and death will only depend on this battle. The rolling sword light, at this moment, was endless. It continued forward, without the slightest hesitation or retreat, and still pierced into the body of the great sage. In the body of this great demon, there seemed to be layers of cosmic light and shadow undulating, and then being destroyed by the sword light. The true blood of the great demon was extremely condensed. When the blood fell, it was like a meteor shower hitting the ground. A drop of true blood became like a star, and it was extremely terrifying. The great sage's blood-red eyes, which were like two stars, seemed to have substance, and his gaze fell on Xian Longsheng, Sword Venerable Tiangang, and the others. He opened his bloody mouth, which seemed to be able to swallow the sun and the moon, and grinned, looking extremely ferocious. The two huge claws suddenly retracted and closed in the middle, clamping the sword light of the heaven-opening sword. The violent power distorted time and space, making the invisible sword light seem to have a tangible quality. The magnificent will of the heaven-opening sword was gradually worn down and imprisoned. The mysterious sword will also seem to have lost its previous profoundness, and was pressed between the two claws of the great sage. The black demonic mist around the body of the great sage kept rising, and there was even a black brilliance flowing in it. It was as thick as ink, and the sword light could not continue moving forward. The sword chi of heaven and earth and the boundless universe sword will, which were attracted by the heaven-opening sword, also showed signs of dissipating, as if they were gradually returning to calmness. It was just that it was not easy for the great sage to fight against the ferocious sword creation magic treasure with his bare hands. At the same time that the giant claws of the demon king stopped the sword light's momentum, wounds appeared on the palms and claws. The tip of the sword light was still deeply embedded in the great sage's right shoulder blade. Xian Longsheng and Sword Lord Heavenly Dipper's faces were a little pale. Their bodies swayed slightly like water ripples, as if their primordial spirits would lose their human form at any time. Quick! The two of them spoke in unison as a ball of light flickered in front of them. The ball of light in front of Sword Sovereign Astral Dipper was the convergence of countless immortal sword chi. Sword Intent and Sword Light combined to form a resplendent sword star. Within the sword star, there seemed to be a long river of starlight flowing. Although Xian Longsheng had also condensed his own Tao fruit, it was different from the heavenly immortal sword Tao true fruit of the past. Instead, it was a blurry ball of light. Suddenly, a ray of sword energy shot out, breaking through the chaos. After the first ray of sword energy, millions of rays of sword energy appeared. The ball of light grew from nothing, and in an instant, tens of thousands of swords formed a world of swords. The two of them exerted their strength together, and the sword light of the sky-opening sword became bright again. The sword Intent seemed to be innately good at opening up, unrestrained and capable of breaking through all obstacles and shackles. It was the exact opposite of what the great sage was doing to restrain the sword light at the moment. The sword light became brighter and brighter, and there was a roar from it, rolling like waves. The millions of swords in the boundless world of the divine land hummed again. Countless sword Intent and sword chi were triggered by the sky-opening sword, and they once again swept toward the great sage. The great sage sneered, as if he didn't care at all. On the other side, great sage Zhuyan stepped into the void and was already above Xian Longsheng and Sword Lord Heavenly Dipper. He also had a cold smile on his face, and then he stomped down on Xian Longsheng and Sword Lord Heavenly Dipper. Xian Longsheng's pupils contracted slightly. The sky-opening sword was restrained by the great sage, and it could not return to attack great sage Zhuyan. At the moment, they were fighting with all their might against the great sage, and they were completely powerless to resist great sage Zhuyan above them. Sword Lord Heavenly Dipper was silent as well. A cold light flashed in his eyes, and he anxiously tried to think of a way to deal with it. The great sage was focused on resisting the sharpness of the sky-opening sword, and they could not repel it in a short time. The threat of great sage Zhuyan had fallen from the sky and was close at hand. At the moment, only Sword Lord Heavenly Dipper could resist great sage Zhuyan alone, temporarily delaying his attack so that they could survive the current crisis. But after he left, Xian Longsheng drove the sky-opening sword alone, and the pressure on the great sage increased sharply. In the end, the result was still not optimistic. Sword will surged around Xian Longsheng and Sword Lord Heavenly Dipper, and their eyes became extremely resolute. They completely ignored the existence of great sage Zhuyan above them, and drove the sky-opening sword with all their might, continuing to attack the great sage. Instead of dying in vain, they would rather fight with their lives on the line and fight for the only chance in a flash. Even if Great Sage Juyin succeeded, they would still further damage the Great Sage. The Great Sage looked at the scene and said coldly, "The great immortal heaven of Shushan no longer exists, and today you have created a new sword of fortune. In time, you might be able to build another Dharma design that is not inferior to the great immortal heaven of Shushan sword formation. At that time, you will more or less have the strength to fight. But it's a pity that you won't have a chance today." His body was filled with black mist, and his terrifying physical chi and blood spread out, merging with the black mist, making the area around his body seem to be a world of its own. Inside the black mist, the figure of the Great Sage seemed to suddenly disappear from the eyes of Sword Lord Heavenly Dipper and Exine Longsheng. They could not see him with their naked eyes, their spiritual consciousness, and their mind. They seemed to have lost track of the Great Sage as well. They slashed with their swords, but they had lost their target, as if they were about to miss. "Give up. If this goes on, we won't be able to damage the Great Sage, and we will be seriously injured by Great Sage Juyin instead. We won't have a chance to fight back later. If we return to the Sword Doppelganger to defend against Great Sage Juyin, we will be at a disadvantage later, but at least we have a chance to fight back. Even if we can't defeat the opponent, we can try our best to stall for time. Others will come to support us. At that time, we won't have to fear the demons in front of us at all. Retreating now is so that we can launch a counterattack later. It's not wise to fight with death." With the appearance of the Sky Opening Sword, Shushan finally has a chance to rise again. "If things really go wrong, I will protect Longsheng and the others and leave with the Sky Opening Sword, even if I have to sacrifice my life. As long as we survive today's disaster, Shushan will have a chance to rise again. Even if we can seriously injure the Great Sage now, we will also be seriously injured by Great Sage Juyin. Kunlun Dragon King is around, and we can't escape the fate of defeat in the end. Even if others come and kill all these big demons, Shushan will be completely destroyed." At this moment, countless thoughts emerged in the minds of Exine Longsheng and Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper, and then they killed all these thoughts as external demons that disturbed their minds. In the end, there was only pure determination left. Even Ji Wenruwei and the others, who had been seriously injured, struggled to stand up at this moment. Although their magic power had dissipated, their sword was still pure. The sword light that pierced into the thick black fog became brighter and more dazzling. Wherever the sword light went, the thick black fog was also divided. It was as if chaos was opening up, leading the tens of thousands of swords formed by the spiritual chi of heaven and earth to continue forward together. The figure of the Great Sage reappeared in the eyes of Exine Longsheng, Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper, and the others. The Great Sage showed a slightly stunned expression. At this moment, Great Sage Juyin came crashing down like a falling sky, reaching the heads of Exine Longsheng and Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper. The bounded domain between heaven and earth suddenly shook slightly. The void cracked, and two figures rushed out from it. One was a tall and handsome young man, and the other was an elegant and graceful woman in a yellow robe. They were Shi Tianhao and Shi Xingyu. Shi Tianhao glared at Great Sage Juyin and said, "You ran away from the vast land of infinite wasteland. What about now?" As he spoke, Shi Tianhao's figure shook and split into two in the void. He was the Ying Yuan and the Desolate God. The 12 divine generals' spiritual bodies and the Sky City appeared above each of their heads, and then they rushed toward Great Sage Juyin together. Almost in the blink of an eye, they were already in front of Great Sage Juyin. The body of the Desolate God threw a punch, and the 12 divine generals' spiritual bodies above his head also threw punches. On the other side, the 100 feet tall body of the Ying Yuan suddenly put its palms together. Endless purple thunderbolts burst from its body, making it look like the god of thunder had descended to the world. Dense purple thunderbolts enveloped its entire body. At the same time, In the sky city above his body of the Inyuan body, an invisible but extremely fierce and indestructible Tiangang divine wind was suddenly raised. Where the storm passed, the huge sky city also seemed to vanish into the void, as if it had disappeared without a trace. The endless nine heavens' divine thunder and the nine heavens' formless gale fused at this moment and helped each other, pushing each other to an unimaginable and seemingly infinite realm. Although the power that kept growing seemed very powerful at first, it was not enough for the great sage Juyin, and the others to pay too much attention to it. However, the potential hidden within and the terrifying speed of growth made even the great demon age of the age of decline frown. Almost in the blink of an eye, the raging and endless power of wind and thunder had increased rapidly, and it was still increasing. A deafening dragon roar sounded. The Kunlun Dragon King stood in front of Shi Tianhao, intending to block the attack for Great Sage Zhuyan. However, his huge body paused for a moment. In the void far away, a misty brilliance shrouded a golden heavenly dragon that was even larger than the Kunlun Dragon King. It was majestic and awe-inspiring, as if it was the origin of all things. It hovered in the void, not only filling up the space between heaven and earth, but also gave people a wonderful feeling that its body had embraced heaven and earth. Shi Xingyun, who was dressed in a light yellow dress, was sitting on the dragon's head. The giant dragon reached out its claws, and the space where the Kunlun Dragon King was suddenly slowed down and turned pale. The void was a blur of chaos, and everything seemed to be shrouded in a grayish-white world. Time stopped flowing, but it also seemed to be changing all the time, as if an instant was an eternity. The Kunlun Dragon King flew into a rage. "You brought yourself to me." Chapter 1406. Staring at Shi Xingyun, the Kunlun Dragon King let out a furious roar. He shook his huge body and broke free from Shi Xingyun's restraints. The eyes of the Kunlun Dragon King, who was waiting for Shi Xingyun, suddenly blinked. For a moment, the sky changed color. When the Kunlun Dragon King opened his eyes, the sky was bright, and it was day. When he closed his eyes, the sky was dark, and it was night. It was the Candle Dragon of the Dragon Tribe. The Candle Dragon Tribe could comprehend the passage of time and the changes of the sun and the moon. It was extremely mysterious. The Kunlun Dragon King immediately revealed his true form. Rays of golden radiance were flickering on his body. When the dazzling, pure, golden radiance came into contact with the hazy radiance that Shi Xingyun had used to bind him, the two of them started to ripple like water. However, the world that had turned gray gradually regained its color. The Kunlun Dragon King's body was full of energy again. He was no longer sluggish and stiff. However, the Kunlun Dragon King's movements were a step slower because of Shi Xingyun's obstruction. On the other side, Shi Tianhao activated the body of the god of rage and the body of the abundant Yuan. He activated the spiritual bodies of the 12 divine generals and the city in the sky and attacked Zhu Yan. Although they were split into two, no matter if it was Shi Tianhao's surplus Yuan body, desolate god body, or the 12 heavenly generals' spiritual bodies in Sky City, there was a mysterious connection between them. They seemed to be independent, but at the same time, they seemed to be one. This caused their attacks to complement each other and become more powerful. Zhu Yan's expression changed slightly. He could clearly feel that even if his next attack could severely injure Xian Longsheng and Celestial Dipper Swordsman, or even kill them, he would not have an easy time under Shi Tianhao's attack. Although he hated the Mount Shu sword sect, sword ancestor Ren Changmei was dead. He did not want to be buried with Mount Shu. Facing Shi Tianhao's attack, he suddenly turned around and quickly retreated. He instantly teleported through time and space, turning the distance between him and Shi Tianhao into a world. Now that great sage Zhu Yan had retreated, the great sage naturally had no intention of continuing to fight against the heaven-opening sword. Even if he were to fight, He would rather fight the great sage Zhu Yan's attack head-on and cause damage to the great sage Zhu Yan instead of passively defending himself. The current leader of the ape clan displayed astonishing strength. He suddenly let out a deafening roar as he faced the sword light of the sky-opening sword that was slashing towards him. Around the great sage, black fog floated. Bright and resplendent stars lit up in the black fog. The stars and the black fog fused together, forming rays of black light. As the black light flowed, the great sage's demonic power and physical body's chi and blood burst out at the same time. The sword light that had pierced into his right shoulder blade was forcibly squeezed out by him. The eyes of Xian Longsheng and Celestial Dipper swordsman suddenly burst with infinite light, as if there was an infinite amount of sword light bursting out. After the sword light of the sky-opening sword paused, it continued to stab toward the omnipotent sage. However, the great sage stepped into the void. With a stomp of his foot, his whole body soared into the sky and directly disappeared into the firmament. Although it was not as mysterious as the ultimate agility, it was more rapid and violent. With a leap, he escaped the pursuit of the sword light of the sky-opening sword. However, after this leap, the great sage descended from the sky again and returned to the front of the crowd in an instant. As he retreated and advanced, he seemed to be even faster than Xian Longsheng. The great sage stared coldly at Shi Tianhao and said, "Zhuri, you deal with Mount Shu and keep them from leaving the mountain. I'll deal with this guy." After saying this, the great sage leaped again. He was already in front of Shi Tianhao. Two giant black claws were clenched into fists. Like two giant hammers, they smashed towards Shi Tianhao's head. Shi Tianhao glared. The 12 divine generals above the body of the desolate god turned into 12 golden men and landed on the top of the city in the sky. His Yingyuan form was like a giant made entirely of thunder. It pounced on the body of the desolate god. Rolling thunder poured into the acupoints all over the body of the desolate god. Shi Tianhao looked up to the sky and roared. The body of the desolate god seemed to have doubled in size. Then, he also punched towards the great sage. The power of the city in the sky and the 12 golden men were added to his body. At this moment, Shi Tianhao seemed to have transformed into a giant god. His power was extremely violent and domineering. He attacked the great sage without hesitation. In an instant, the two sides blasted thousands of punches between heaven and earth. The void was completely shattered and annihilated. The land of Mount Shu was almost completely barren. The scene was bloody and violent. It attracted the attention of great sage Zhu Yan, Xian Longsheng, Shi Xingyun, and the others of the side. After the Great Lane Temple's Dharma ending realm, the Divine Land had not seen such a scene for a long time. A cultivator of the human clan was fighting a great demon of the Dharma ending realm head-on in close combat. On the other hand, the powerful cultivators of the Buddhist clan used the Vairokanapam. Although it was a domineering method to subdue demons, it was also peaceful and natural. It was far from what Shi Tianhao was doing. At this moment, everyone felt like they were watching two great demons of the Dharma ending realm with extremely powerful bodies fighting each other. Deep purple thunder patterns appeared all over Shi Tianhao's body. The 12 golden men and the city in the sky above his head also fell into the top of his head at this moment, completely merging with him. At this moment, Shi Tianhao, whose body was growing rapidly, also had his head reaching the sky and his feet on the ground. His head was about to break through the sky and become as huge as the great sage. From the acupoints all over his body, countless blood chi rose and condensed in the void into the figures of chaos, Tao Tai, Qiongqi, Flame Dragon, Ancestral Crocodile, White Jade Dragon, and even the primordial Celestial Dragon. They roared together with Shi Tianhao. Every punch that Shi Tianhao threw seemed to trigger the endless power of the primordial era. Thousands of great demons followed, and the momentum was earth-shattering. Everyone looked at the scene in front of them in shock. They watched as Shi Tianhao wrestled with the great sage, who was the strongest among the demons of the Dharma-ending realm in terms of pure physical strength and blood qi. It seemed that Shi Tianhao was not at a disadvantage at all. The great sage stared at Shi Tianhao with a cold expression. He also roared angrily. Black light flowed all over his body, and he suddenly leaped up and appeared behind Shi Tianhao. Then, he turned around and clawed at Shi Tianhao's temples. As the terrifying power surged, the great demon shadows on Shi Tianhao's body began to dissipate even before it reached him. Even the thunder patterns on his temples shook violently, as if they were about to shatter. Although his body was extremely huge, Shi Tianhao's movement was as fast as the great sage. He did not seem clumsy at all, and in fact, he was even faster. He suddenly crouched down and dodged the great sage's ear-piercing attack. Then, his huge body was as agile as a raccoon. He spun on the spot and faced the great sage. Then he clawed fiercely at the great sage's chest and abdomen. Shi Tianhao's temples were hit by the great sage's fists. Even if his head did not explode, he would be seriously injured. If Shi Tianhao's claws hit him, he would also be able to cut open the great sage's abdomen. Before the great sage's claws missed, he had already kicked at Shi Tianhao. Shi Tianhao exhaled and shouted. His left and right hands separated, one above and one below. The momentum of his left hand did not stop, and it continued to grab at the great sage's chest and abdomen. His right hand clenched into a fist and smashed down. When this fist smashed down, the void, which was already in ruins, immediately collapsed and was annihilated into layers of chaos. At this moment, the chaos was frozen by Shi Tianhao's terrifying fist power. For a moment, the chaos could not be reborn into the void. All the power of creation in this void was swept up by Shi Tianhao's fist and gathered at one point. Accompanying it was a desolate and chaotic primordial aura. The desolate and primitive aura and the exuberant vitality seemed to have merged into one at this moment. Xianmin Tianzong Linfang's direct martial arts, the yin and yang Guyuan true scripture. This was the yin and yang Guyuan hammer. Shi Tianhao's fist smashed down and collided with the great sage's leg, which was surrounded by black light. Both of their bodies suddenly shook violently, and at the same time, they seemed to lose their balance. The great sage's body tilted slightly, and he almost fell. An ominous glint flashed in his eyes. He steadied his body, and the two giant claws that had missed before also fell together, grabbing at Shi Tianhao's back. Shi Tianhao smiled fiercely, and his claws didn't stop grabbing at the great sage. He turned a blind eye to the great sage's attack and wanted to fight back with attack. When the two sides collided, heaven and earth shook violently. Countless drops of blood essence drifted down to the ground, turning into a sea of fire. Except for the area where Xian Longsheng, Sword Venerable Tiangang, Kunlong King, and the others were standing, everything in the sea of fire was instantly vaporized into nothingness by the scorching heat. Shi Tianhao's left hand directly opened up a terrible wound on the great sage's chest and abdomen. One could even vaguely see the pulsating internal organs inside. His heart, liver, spleen, lungs, and 5 viscera and 6 bowels were as huge as mountains. None of them had the color of blood, but they were golden like crystal glass, emitting a dazzling brilliance that was even more dazzling than the stars. The injury on Shi Tianhao's back was even more terrible. The great sage's fist and claws had smashed it into a pulp, and even broken bones could be seen in the mess of flesh and blood. The bones were like crystals, flashing with colorful brilliance. Wind, thunder, water, and fire. They burst out as the bones were broken, and countless divine lights filled the world. However, Shi Tianhao and the great sage didn't seem to feel the horrifying injuries at all. The great sage stared at Shi Tianhao, and his blood-red eyes suddenly changed into a deep black color. 2 intense black lights erupted from them, and they hit Shi Tianhao's head. Sure, Tianhao didn't dodge. He raised his head, and his whole head suddenly turned golden, looking somewhat similar to the 12 golden statues. The black lights shot out from the great sage's eyes hit Tianhao's forehead. Even his seemingly indestructible golden skin was suddenly hit, and two dents appeared, covered with dense cracks. But at this moment, a dazzling brilliance flickered between Tianhao's eyebrows. It was the divine light of termination, and it turned into a destructive rainbow, cutting off everything in its way, and shot toward the great sage's head. All the black hair on the great sage's body stood on end. Ignoring his right leg, which had temporarily become numb after colliding with Tianhao's yin and yang guiyuan hammer, he forcibly exerted force and leaped into the sky, narrowly avoiding Tianhao's divine light of termination. The two sides fought a series of bloody battles, and it was only at this moment that they temporarily distanced themselves from each other. The great sage looked at Tianhao, who seemed to have turned into a bloody man. He saw that Tianhao had retracted the divine light of termination, and another divine light of origin fell, and began to rapidly heal his injuries. Chapter 1407. The great sage stood in the void. His chest and abdomen were bleeding, and his internal organs could be vaguely seen in the huge wound. The flesh and blood around his wound kept wriggling, trying to heal, but the progress was extremely slow. Tianhao's claw contained a massive amount of chaotic qi of desolation, which made time and space seem to stand still. Everything could not be born, and the qi of life could not be gathered. Even the great sage, a great demon with an extremely strong body, could not heal his injury in a short time. The great sage stared at Tianhao with a livid face. His body was even a little crooked, and his center of gravity was completely on his left leg. His right leg, which had collided with Tianhao's yin and yang guiyuan hammer, was a little numb. Later, in order to avoid Tianhao's divine light of termination, he had forced himself to leap into the sky. As a result, his right leg, which was already a little inconvenient to begin with, was now even more stiff. The great sage had precise control over his body. He could clearly feel that the bone marrow in his right leg was fluctuating and shaking uncontrollably. At the place where his fist collided with Tianhao's fist, countless tiny blood vessels burst, and his meridians were twisted and torn. Tianhao, who was below, also looked up at the great sage. The injury on his back was even more serious than the great sage's. There were two dents on his forehead. If he had not displayed the divine sense of the eternal golden body at the moment when the great sage's attack was about to hit him, his head might have been pierced by the great sage. After his right hand collided with the great sage's right leg without any fancy moves, the circulation of his qi and blood also felt sluggish. But at this moment, a ray of light that was completely different from the divine light of termination rushed out from between Tianhao's eyebrows. It seemed to contain all things, including the mystery of the changes of the desolation. This light triggered the emergence of countless patterns of light waves, which turned into layers of auspicious clouds that enveloped Tianhao's body. Immediately, the injuries on Tianhao's forehead and back began to heal rapidly. It was not a cure, nor was it a reversal of time, nor was it a transformation of the real and the false. Instead, in the blink of an eye, it made him seem as if he was in the most perfect state he had been in at the beginning. Even the slightest change would cause everything to return to its original state. The two dents on Tianhao's forehead quickly disappeared, as if he hadn't suffered the great sage's attack at all. The injury on his back was quite terrifying, and there was also the remnant of the great sage's demonic power and demonic aura, which slowed down the rate of recovery. However, it was still healing at an astonishing speed. The great sage didn't just stand there and watch. Instead, he let out a long roar and forcefully suppressed his injuries before attacking Tianhao again. The great sage had heard of the miraculousness of Shi Tianhao's divine light of origin. When the two sides were fighting each other, the great sage was already mentally prepared for this scene. Therefore, at this moment, he didn't hesitate to rush towards Shi Tianhao. He wanted to interrupt Shi Tianhao's recovery process with a rapid attack, forcing Shi Tianhao to continue attacking him. He had already suffered a blow from the heaven-opening sword before, and now he was injured on top of that. If he waited for Shi Tianhao to fully recover, the situation would be disadvantageous to him. Shi Tianhao laughed. The divine light of origin between his eyebrows suddenly disappeared, and the divine light of termination shot out once again, hitting the great sage who was attacking him. The two sides fought again, and the sky fell and the earth cracked. You attack me with a punch, and I attack you with a claw. The two huge figures moved in all directions, as if they were everywhere, but it was hard for people to see where they were. Deafening roars and roars sounded in the void. Some of them were from the great sage, and some were from Shi Tianhao. The scene in front of them didn't seem to be a battle between a human and a demon, but two primitive beasts that were fighting fiercely. Even Gu Jun, Xian Longsheng, Sword Venerable Tiangang, and Shi Xingyun were stunned by the scene. Such a scene hadn't been seen for many years. Most of them were only mentioned in the relevant records of the Archean epoch. It was the time when the human race rose and fought with the demon race. Shi Tianhao and the great sage were fighting fiercely. They fought from the east to the west, and the whole scene was the most eye-catching. However, the other battles had also reached the climax. Shun Long King, who had been trapped by Gu Jun and the Longevity Lotus, had already rushed out of the sea of white lotuses with a deafening dragon roar. Shun Long King's body was flashing with golden light, and there were waves of air rolling in the light. The earthy yellow air waves were as heavy as the earth. It was the yellow dragon clan's innate skill. After it evolved, it became the earth chi in the center. The waves rolled forward like the sea. It was the sea dragon clan's innate skill. It could control the essence chi of the infinite water elephant and move like a boundless ocean. Like the transformation of plants, a dark green color spread in the void. It was also the yellow dragon clan's innate skill. After it evolved, it became the wood elephant creation chi that was full of vitality, and everything grew. The rolling waves of fire turned into a boundless sea of fire. The crimson red light raged everywhere. It was the fire dragon clan's innate skill. It could control the fierce and domineering dragon fire and burn the world. Rays of black light kept flashing. They were heavy and condensed. However, at the edge of the light, there were rays of blinding white light that looked like sharp swords. It was the Black Dragon clan's innate skill. After it evolved, it turned the toughest into the sharpest and formed the chi of the golden elephant. The chi of the five elements kept changing and formed a mysterious and domineering destructive force. It crushed the white lotuses and carried Shun Long King out of the sea of flowers. At this moment, Gu Jun and the Longevity Lotus had already appeared in front of Shun Long King. However, Shun Long King did not attack Gu Jun. Instead, he rushed towards Shi Xingyun. Gu Jun's expression did not change. His left hand kept changing the hand seals while his right hand reached out his index finger and lightly tapped on the Longevity Lotus below him. At that moment, the Longevity Lotus seat suddenly opened up. The 18 petals turned into 18 balls of light. Then, they formed a straight line and shot towards Shun Long one after another. In the golden light around Shun Long King, all kinds of exquisite great Tao appeared at the same time. One of them contained many principles. Apart from the Fire Dragon clan, the Yellow Dragon clan, and the Black Dragon clan's innate skills, the Hui Dragon clan's ability to move through space and time, and the Candle Dragon clan's ability to manipulate time were also present in him. He broke through the void at high speed, causing the Longevity Lotus attack to miss. However, he did not stop moving. His target was still Shi Xingyun. However, Gu Jun performed the hand seals with both of his hands. Then, he combined the hand seals with both hands and formed a straight line of 18 balls of light. They seemed to have formed some kind of strange formation, radiating rays of light. Under the illumination of the light, Shenlong King's movement suddenly paused. He could not help but want to throw himself into the formation formed by the balls of light. A cold light flashed in Shenlong King's eyes. He seemed to be enraged. Gu Jun carried the longevity lotus and fought with Shenlong King in the void. On the ground, Exine Longsheng, Celestial Gang swordsman, and Great Saint Juyin were also engaged in a fierce battle. Everyone in Mount Shu, including Exine Longsheng and Tian Gang Sword Venerable, still guarded the foundation of the sect. Although all the peaks of Mount Shu had been destroyed, everyone was still united. The sword will and sword qi converged into one furnace, and together, they added to the sky-opening sword to fight against Zhu Yin. Although Celestial Gang swordsman's cultivation was higher, and he had a breakthrough in his understanding of swordsmanship, he still had the foundation of divine sword qi. At this moment, he did not take over the heaven-opening sword. Instead, he presided over the sword formation and strengthened his sword will and sword qi to Exine Longsheng. He was also injured in the battle with the great sage. At this moment, even if he held the heaven-opening sword, it would be difficult for him to fight against great Saint Zhu Yin alone. It would be better for him to gather everyone's strength. Exine Longsheng's face was as pale as paper, but the hand holding the sword did not waver. Even if he attracted the spiritual qi of the world to form the sword edge, his hand seemed to be heavy as if he was holding a side of the world, but he was still stable. He stabbed the sword, and the sword light dispersed. Great Saint Zhu Yin stared coldly at Exine Longsheng, Celestial Gang swordsman, and the others. He launched his magic power, and his mountain-like body seemed to be ethereal. When he wanted to attack the people of Mount Shu Sword Sect, the distance that was far away in the sky became close in an instant. It seemed that no matter how his opponents retreated, they still could not avoid his attack. Even if they moved in the void like him, they still could not open the distance. When Great Saint Zhu Yin wanted to avoid his opponent's attack, he was close in the previous moment, but in the next moment, he was already far away in the sky. No matter how his opponents approached, how they increased their speed, and how they broke through the void to catch up, it seemed that they could not get close to him. The distance between them was even getting farther and farther. Between heaven and earth, Great Saint Zhu Yin, like a white jade mountain, moved back and forth, leaving fiery footprints in the void, as if they were real. The sword light of the sky-opening sword was extremely powerful. It flickered between heaven and earth, shrinking and changing. Even with Great Saint Zhu Yin's amazing magic power, it still could not overpower the brilliance of the sky-opening sword. When Great Saint Zhu Yin retreated, the sky-opening sword followed. Although it was not as fast as before, it was still hard for Great Saint Zhu Yin to ignore. When Great Saint Zhu Yin attacked, the sword light of the sky-opening sword could also block his way in time, making it difficult for him to attack. Neither side could do anything to the other, but Great Saint Zhu Yin was not in a hurry. He looked to the other side from time to time. There, Shi Xingyun was withstanding the storm-like attacks of the Kunlun Dragon King. At this moment, the Kunlun Dragon King's expression was cold. There was not a trace of anger or hatred in his eyes, only coldness. When he opened and closed his eyes, it was as if the sun and the moon were rotating. The mysterious magic power kept breaking Shi Xingyun's protective light. Wherever the golden light around the Kunlun Dragon King reached, the black and white space would regain its color, and the flow of time would return to normal. He shuttled back and forth in the void and launched a series of rapid attacks at Shi Xingyun. His attacks were getting faster and faster. Although Shi Xingyun had refined the immortal dragon city into her body and recovered part of Tianlong Jin's memory and experience, she was still not an expert in the Dharma-ending realm. Under the unpredictable series of attacks of the Kunlun Dragon King, it was easy for her to be distracted. However, Shi Xingyun had clearly anticipated this. She defended herself by remaining calm and guarded her own line of defense, avoiding the Kunlun Dragon King's weakness and dealing with him. However, among all the battles at the scene, her side was undoubtedly the most dangerous and disadvantageous one. Chapter 1408. The eyes of the Kuan Dragon King were filled with cold, murderous intent. His ferocious attacks rained down on Shi Xingyun like tidal waves. Shi Xingyun was at a disadvantage, but she did not lose her composure. She continued to deal with the Kuan Dragon King. Although the misty light around the gigantic body of the heavenly dragon was fading away, Shi Xingyun did not panic. When the Kuan Dragon King pounced at her again, Shi Xingyun slapped the gigantic head of the dragon. The eyes of the dragon suddenly opened. The body, which was even larger than the Kuan Dragon King, swayed in the void. Majestic golden light shone, triggering many mysterious concepts and merging them into one. It was the innate magical concept of the primordial celestial dragons. It was as if she was the supreme ruler of the heavens. Billowing golden clouds of dragon might surge from the scales of the gigantic dragon. Shi Xingyun's eyes flashed and became the same as the dragon's eyes. She let out a long roar that shook the heavens. The giant dragon beneath her also opened its mouth wide and let out a soul-stirring roar. Even Xian Longsheng, Great Saint Zhuyin, Sword Venerable Tiangang, Gu Jun, and the others felt their minds trembling when they heard it. The Kuan Dragon King and Shun Dragon King were both shocked and enraged. Not only was Shun Dragon King restrained by Gu Jun, but the Kuan Dragon King also opened his mouth and let out a deafening roar. The heavenly voice of Dragon King versus the heavenly voice of Dragon King. The violent sound waves formed one golden ripple after another, rolling and vibrating in the void. It completely condensed into a substance and spread far away, crushing the surrounding space and sweeping away everything in its path. The entire West Shu, along with the mountain peaks that were thousands of miles away, collapsed like wheat being harvested. The earth shattered. Where the two golden light waves came into contact, the waves were all dispersed. Everything in the space where the two waves came into contact was turned into nothingness. When the two heavenly voices of the Dragon Emperor clashed, the deafening sound became softer. However, no one dared to underestimate the destructive power of the two heavenly voices. Meanwhile, in other parts of the vast land of the Divine Land, even if they were far away, everyone could still hear the terrifying dragon roar, which kept echoing in their ears for a long time. Amidst the furious roar of the dragon, the Kunlun Dragon King swam against the current and approached Shi Xingyun. He then fiercely clawed at the head of the giant dragon. Shi Xingyun's eyes flickered. The giant dragon beneath him also raised its claw and charged towards the Kuan Dragon King. Both parties clashed head-on. The scales on the Kunlun Dragon King's body opened and closed, and there were mysterious runes flashing on every dragon scale. Even though he was enraged, the Kunlun Dragon King had a wealth of battle experience. He mainly focused on close combat, but he kept changing his attacking methods, which made Shi Xingyun dizzy and overwhelmed. The primordial sky dragon was one of the top existences among all the demons in the world when it came to melee combat. To the Kuan Dragon King, his strength was not only limited to his physical body and the power of his qi and blood. Like the omnipotent sage and Shi Tianhao, close combat was also his forte. However, Shi Xingyun was not good at melee combat. Even though he had awakened part of Tian Long Jin's memories, he was still no match for the Kunlun Dragon King. Even though the giant dragon beneath him was powerful, the Kunlun Dragon King's constant attacks and changing rhythm made Shi Xingyun feel like he was in a difficult situation. The Kunlun Dragon King was enjoying the fight. A cold gleam flashed across his eyes. The right front claw that was previously broken by Lin Feng was now glowing with a golden light. Streams of blood and meridians flowed towards his right claw. Kunlun Dragon King activated his energy and temporarily reconstructed his right front claw, making it look exactly the same as before. On the surface of the dragon's claw, there were streams of black watery, light moving constantly on the golden dragon scales. It looked similar to the Black Sea that was covered in golden light and black water. The Kunlun Dragon King suddenly regained his strength and struck out with his right front claw. Shi Xingyun was caught off guard and could only move the giant dragon's head slightly. Even though he managed to dodge in time, the Kunlun Dragon King's claw still managed to grab his neck. The Kunlun Dragon King exerted more force on his claw, trying to penetrate the giant dragon's neck. He did not waste his time over the years. The dragon tribe's research on the power of the Black Sea is getting deeper and deeper. Shi Xingyun frowned. He has only temporarily reconstructed his broken claw. It won't take long for him to recover his broken claw. The giant dragon's neck was also covered in golden dragon scales. There were also many runes floating on the scales, increasing his defense to the maximum. At the same time, the misty light that resembled the river of time appeared again and infected the Kunlun Dragon King's claw. The golden dragon claw that was glowing with black light was covered in a layer of grayish-white luster. It was as if time had stopped. The true meaning of eternity, immortality, and indestructibility appeared on Shi Xingyun's body. His defense was raised to the maximum. The Kunlun Dragon King bellowed furiously and roared continuously. The light on his claw broke through the grayish-white luster and continued to attack the giant dragon's neck with his powerful attack. The two of them were in a stalemate, one attacking and the other defending. However, Shi Xingyun's heavenly voice of the Dragon Emperor started to fade. On the other hand, the Kunlun Dragon King's heavenly voice of the Dragon Emperor lasted for a long time and still shook the nine heavens. After a long period of fighting, Shi Xingyun's soul power was greatly depleted. Shi Xingyun looked at the Kunlun Dragon King with a solemn expression. Her eyes flickered, and she subconsciously looked in the direction of Shi Tianhao, Gu Jun, Xian Longsheng, Honorable Swordsman Tiangang, and the others. After a moment of silence, she suddenly slapped the giant dragon's head. The giant dragon's body shook and started to twist. The Kunlun Dragon King's claw shook. He felt that he could no longer hold onto Shi Xingyun. Although Shi Xingyun started to break free from the Kunlun Dragon King's grip, her defense started to weaken. She could no longer defend herself against the Kunlun Dragon King's piercing claw. The giant dragon roared and struggled to break free from the Kunlun Dragon King's claw. However, there were many wounds on its neck. It looked as if its throat had been torn apart. The Kunlun Dragon King's gaze was cold and cruel. Trying to escape, he continued to pounce forward, tearing the space apart and leaving more wounds on the giant dragon's body. As a misty light flowed like the river of time, the giant dragon's body glowed brightly. The wounds on its body healed rapidly, as if time was flowing backward. However, Shi Xingyun, who was on the dragon's head, let out a muffled groan. Although her body was formed by light and shadow, it was as if her body was made of flesh and blood. Bloody wounds appeared on her slender neck, and her yellow robe was also stained with blood. She risked being injured by the Kunlun Dragon King and urged the giant dragon to soar into the sky. She fled in another direction. However, the void was in a state of chaos due to the ongoing battle. The four battlefields were separated and overlapped, blurring the communication with the surroundings. Shi Xingyun's escape did not allow her to leave the battlefields. Instead, she was still traversing the battlefields. She needed to reorient herself in the chaotic space and time and find the right path. From afar, one could see a dazzling ray of light flying between the heavens and the earth. It was twisting and turning, and it often turned back. It looked like a headless fly, but it was actually because the void was in a state of chaos. Shi Xingyun continued to walk in the right direction. The Kunlun Dragon King followed closely behind her. His speed was faster and more agile than hers. Every time the Kunlun Dragon King caught up to her, Shi Xingyun had to pay a price to escape. The two giant dragons chased each other and stopped occasionally. In the midst of the flashes of light, two giant figures flashed past them. They were Shi Tianhao and the Great Sage, who were fighting each other to the point that blood splattered all over the place. Seeing that Shi Xingyun was in danger, Shi Tianhao let out a long roar and leaped forward, shaking off the great sage and rushing towards the Kunlun Dragon King. How could the great sage let go of his opponent? His giant body leaped into the sky and instantly caught up with Shi Tianhao, attacking him. Shi Xingyun turned around to look at the Kunlun Dragon King, then looked at the injured great sage. She did not continue to escape and let Shi Tianhao deal with the two doomsday demons. Instead, she turned around and faced the great sage, taking over the opponent for Shi Tianhao. Regardless of whether the great sage's combat power was stronger or weaker than the Kunlun Dragon King's, at least he would not be as decisive as the Kunlun Dragon King. Even if the ape tribe and the dragon tribe were to form an alliance, they would not fight to the death for the sake of their mortal enemy. As they brushed past each other, Shi Tianhao and Shi Xingyun were ready to exchange opponents. At this moment, the Kunlun Dragon King stared coldly at Shi Tianhao. With a long roar, he ignored Shi Tianhao, who was attacking him, and continued to attack Shi Xingyun. At this moment, he was willing to take a blow from Shi Tianhao to kill Shi Xingyun. The Kunlun Dragon King was confident that even if he were to take a blow from Shi Tianhao, he would at most be severely injured. He might even be able to retain a considerable amount of combat power. Then, he could slowly deal with Shi Tianhao together with the Great Sage. Now that Shi Xingyun was suddenly attacked by the Kunlun Dragon King and the Omnipotent Sage, she was at risk of dying on the spot because of her weak strength. Being attacked by the two doomsday demons from the front and the back, she did not even have a space to dodge. However, at this moment, the Great Sage, who was facing Shi Xingyun, furrowed his brows. Shi Xingyun's gaze was calm and peaceful. She did not appear to be trying to stay calm, but was actually panicking. At this moment, Shi Tianhao, who was attacking the Kunlun Dragon King, suddenly raised his hand. It was as if he was holding up a boundless starry sky in his palm. Boundless light surged in his palm. One could only see the dazzling light, but one could not see what it was. However, the onlookers could clearly feel that there seemed to be an invisible roulette spinning continuously within the light. As the roulette spun, it was as if the entire universe was spinning at the same time. The will of the entire boundless universe was awakened. It was the great celestial wheel. The Kunlun Dragon King's expression changed drastically. Such an attack was not something that he could withstand with his body. However, it was too late for him to react. Shi Tianhao combined his primordial god of desolation with the help of the Sky City and the 12 metal men. He lifted the great celestial wheel and smashed it down on the Kunlun Dragon King. Boom! As the world shook violently, it was as if the heavens were collapsing and being destroyed. Vaguely, it seemed as if countless universes and worlds were being destroyed at the same time. The terrifying power converged and poured down. The destructive power landed heavily on the Kunlun Dragon King's waist. Chapter 1409. If Shi Tianhao had activated the Great Celestial Wheel during his battle with the Great Sage, the Kunlun Dragon King would not have dared to take a blow from Shi Tianhao head-on. The Great Celestial Wheel, the Supreme Imperial Palace, and the Ding of Shenzhou were all owned by Xianmen Tianzong. This was a well-known fact. Both the Great Sage and the Kunlun Dragon King knew about it beforehand. Although the Omnipotent Sage had previously fought with Shi Tianhao to the point of causing sparks to fly everywhere, he had always been vigilant in his heart to guard against Shi Tianhao's treasures. His ascending to the heavens' magical power had always been on guard against Shi Tianhao's powerful attacks. After all, the Great Sage had been fighting with Shi Tianhao for a long time, so he was always on guard. However, as time went by, both sides were covered with injuries, and Shi Tianhao still did not reveal any trump cards. On the other side of the battlefield, the Kunlun Dragon King, Shun Dragon King, and the Great Sage Zhu Yin were gradually deceived. At this moment, the shocked and furious Kunlun Dragon King had completely understood that Shi Tianhao did not only want to defeat them and force them to retreat, but he also wanted to inflict serious injuries on them. He even wanted to keep them in the divine land forever. Shi Tianhao had been waiting for an opportunity to inflict serious injuries on them, so that they would not be able to escape in time. Shi Xingyun's previous escape was also intentional. It was to bait the Kunlun Dragon King, so that the Kunlun Dragon King would send himself to Shi Tianhao's great celestial wheel. If it was only Shi Tianhao's attack, the Kunlun Dragon King was confident that he could withstand it head-on. Even if he was severely injured, he could still guarantee that his attack would hit Shi Xingyun. However, now that Shi Tianhao was attacking him with the Great Celestial Wheel, such a violent attack would even exhaust the Kunlun Dragon King's energy, making it difficult for him to inflict any effective damage on Shi Tianhao. He would have to suffer Shi Tianhao's attack in vain. Back when Shi Tianhao had just reached the Return to Void stage, the Kunlun Dragon King had been forced into a disadvantageous position by Shi Tianhao's Sky City, the 12 metal colossi, Ding of Shenzhou, and the Yin and Yang life and death formation. Even though the Kunlun Dragon King was a prideful man, he knew his place and adopted reasonable strategies to deal with Shi Tianhao's attacks. He did his best to defend himself, evade, or put his life on the line. Even if he was defeated and killed, at least he would have the leeway to counterattack. But at this moment, it was like opening the door to a thief, instantly sending himself into a dangerous situation with a slim chance of survival. This was the fatal strike that Shi Tianhao and Shi Xingyun had planned for a long time. The timing was perfect, leaving no chance for the Kunlun Dragon King. The Kunlun Dragon King was enraged. He wanted to evade, but the terrifying attack that seemed to be able to cause the sky to collapse completely locked his body in place. He wanted to use his full strength to inflict severe damage on Shi Xingyun and make him pay. However, he was a little too late. This attack was so close, yet so far away. He wanted to counterattack and make sure Tianhao suffer. However, it was too late to change his attack. Even if he struggled to counterattack, he would not be able to inflict any effective damage on Shi Tianhao. In fact, he might not even be able to defend himself, even if he gritted his teeth and concentrated all his strength to take this attack. The Kunlun Dragon King let out an earth-shattering roar. He had been careless and ended up in such a state. He was filled with resentment, and he would not be able to cleanse himself even if he tried. In the end, he still used all his strength to pounce toward Shi Xingyun. However, the great celestial wheel had already smashed heavily into his body. A loud boom sounded between heaven and earth, and the entire vast thousand realms seemed to tremble. The gigantic golden heavenly dragon stretched across the sky, but its body made a strange bend. With this bend, the world seemed to have been dislocated. It was as if it had been split into two by a knife. Then it went up and down, and the scenery was broken and intertwined. Time and space seemed to have lost their color at this moment, turning pale and blurry. The violent airflow continued to blow in all directions, causing the other people who were fighting nearby to look askance. Everyone fixed their eyes on the Kunlun Dragon King and saw that the golden radiance on his body had dimmed. His waist was drenched in blood, and the scales on his body had all burst open. Together with his blood and flesh, they rained down a golden rainstorm from the sky. When the scales landed on the ground, they were like mountains. When the blood dripped onto the ground, it turned into a golden lake. Hot air rose from the lake, scorching the surrounding land. The Kunlun Dragon King's huge body was almost split into two at the waist. If not for his primordial celestial dragon body being so strong, his body would have been split into two by Shi Tianhao. Even so, there was only a small amount of flesh and blood left. His bones were all broken, and his tendons and meridians were all broken. The Kunlun Dragon King didn't even feel the pain at first. He only felt that he couldn't control the back half of his body. His undying demon soul also shook violently and was damaged along with his true form. In his sea of consciousness, the dragon shadow, formed by the demon soul, was only left with the front half, and the back half was gradually disintegrating. Looking at the Kunlun Dragon King's condition, Even the great sage and Zhu Yin, great saint, felt their hearts skip a beat. They could vaguely feel a chill in their lower bodies. The usually calm Shun Dragon King let out a deafening roar and let Gu Jun hit him with a longevity lotus. He endured the pain and rushed towards the Kunlun Dragon King. A mysterious pattern appeared on Shun Dragon King's forehead. It flashed brightly, and a black light shot out and landed on the Kunlun Dragon King. The Kunlun Dragon King's body trembled, and then the same pattern appeared on his forehead. The pattern turned into an illusion of light and shadow, communicating with the mysterious sea. Waves surged in the mysterious sea, and a majestic force passed through the endless void and came to the empty sea, trying to bring the Kunlun Dragon King back to the mysterious sea. The Kunlun Dragon King wanted to resist this time, but he couldn't. He was too badly injured and his strength was at rock bottom. But at this moment, Shi Tianhao, who looked like a mighty god, said, "Do you think that the mysterious sea ritual of the dragon race is omnipotent?" His voice spread out and shook the divine prefecture. It was as if a god had descended. Shi Tianhao waved his hand, and a ball of purple energy flew out. Within the ball of purple energy was a tree branch. It looked thin, but when the purple energy dissipated and revealed the tree branch's true appearance, it was thousands of feet long and dozens of feet thick. The leaves on the branch were about an acre in circumference. They were green and full of vitality. It looked as if the branches were still on the tree and not plucked by someone. The tree branch swelled in the air as it faced the wind. The surrounding purple chi was all absorbed into its body. In the end, the tree branch branched out and flickered with 7-colored precious light that illuminated the heavens. It looked similar to the mysterious sky treasure tree on the top of the Jade Capital Mountain. The giant tree branch turned into a beam of light and plunged into the mysterious sea illusion of the Kunlun Dragon King's divine prefecture. The mysterious sea illusion of the mysterious sea was occupied by the tree branch and started to shrink. Stimulated by the power of the tree branch, the waves in the mysterious sea that were originally calm suddenly rose and rolled towards the tree branch. The leaves on the tree branch kept shaking and the 7-colored light was worn down. Gradually, the light dimmed. But Shun Dragon King's eyes were filled with despair. Being trapped by the tree branch, the Kunlun Dragon King couldn't return to the mysterious sea through the mysterious sea ritual. Although it was obvious that the mysterious sea ritual would be able to completely crush the mysterious sky tree branch in a short period of time, the Kunlun Dragon King was in danger. After the attack, Shi Tianhao had no intention of holding back. He raised the great celestial wheel in his hand again, as if he was lifting up the heavens and realms again. A look of determination appeared in the eyes of the Kunlun Dragon King. He mustered all the remaining strength in his severely injured body and attacked Shi Xingyun once again. At this moment, Shi Xingyun was fighting with the omnipotent sage and was already at a disadvantage. Hence, it was difficult for him to survive the Kunlun Dragon King's attack, and he was once again injured by the Kunlun Dragon King. However, as the Kunlun Dragon King was already severely injured, he was unable to unleash much of his strength. Hence, Shi Xingyun was able to endure the injury and evade the omnipotent sage's attack. On the other side, Gu Jun also knew that the battle had reached a critical juncture. He moved the longevity lotus throne to entangle Shun Dragon King. Shi Tianhao stood in the void like a deity. He raised the great celestial wheel in his hand and smashed it down again. This time, the attack hit the top of Shi Xingyun's head. Once again, there was a violent wave in the sky. Countless rays of light exploded and shot in all directions. At this moment, a huge golden silhouette of a heavenly dragon appeared in the sky. It covered the heavens and looked down on all living beings in the vast thousand worlds. However, the eyes of this mighty heavenly dragon seemed lifeless at this moment. Then, the silhouette of the heavenly dragon started to shatter, causing thunderous sounds to be heard in the surroundings. The light pulsated intermittently and fluctuated continuously. The great demons of the age of cultivation decline were closely related to the vast thousand worlds. Their death would even cause some changes in the weather. Today, the second most powerful figure in the dragon race, second only to the Yuan King, the primordial heavenly dragon who had dominated the great heaven primordial world for countless years, had died in the divine land of the human race. The one who killed him was the seventh disciple of the celestial emperor of Huang, Lin Feng, the celestial emperor of Huang, Shi Tianhao. Ever since Lin Feng killed Yudu in the war between the two worlds, he was the second great demon of the age of cultivation declined to die in recent years. The death of the Kuan Dragon King shook the vast thousand worlds. On the east sea of the divine land, which was located in the west and east of Shushan, there was suddenly a violent storm. Waves rolled continuously, and demonic aura surged from the realm passage that connected the East Sea to the vast, infinite wasteland. It seemed to be extremely violent and angry. A mighty dragon roar came from afar. It came from the vast, infinite wasteland and resounded throughout the divine land. Everyone knew that it was the roar of the current master of the dragon race, the Yuan King. The death of the Kuan Dragon King was so sudden that even the Yuan King was caught off guard. The anger in his heart was uncontrollable. However, at this moment, in the sky above the East Sea, Xianli, who was sitting cross-legged at the entrance of the realm passage, suddenly stood up. She raised her right hand, and light flowed in her palm, gathering into a long sword. The blade of the sword was filled with chaotic and blurry colors. It was as if everything had come to an end and creation had turned into nothingness. At the edge of the blade, there were two flowing lights, one black and one white, flowing and sliding around the edge of the blade. The terrifying sword will made people tremble with fear. Xianli took a step forward and passed through the realm passage, arriving on the vast, infinite wasteland. At this moment, she raised the blade high and slashed it down. Chapter 14:10. In the vast thousand worlds, the endless evil aura that signified destruction and destruction all gathered in the sword in Xianli's hand, forming an invisible pillar of air. The pillar of air condensed into a world-destroying blade, and the entire world seemed to be facing its end at this moment. Xianli slashed out with her sword, and the mysterious sword light streaked across the void, targeting the Yuan Dragon King in the distance. As she slashed out, the clouds in the Ying Sea shattered, the waves in the Xian Sea surged, and the stars in the Star Ocean were destroyed one after another. Void storms raged in the empty sea, and the southern wilderness of the divine land even cracked open, revealing thousands of calamities in the Nether Sea. Xianli's sword shook the 5 seas of heaven essence, and it was extremely domineering. The void of infinite wilderness suddenly cracked open, and an incomparably huge golden heavenly dragon appeared from within. There seemed to be streams of light on the heavenly dragon's body, spreading in all directions in the vast thousand worlds. The heavenly dragon felt the terrifying power contained in Xianli's sword, and its eyes darkened. Patterns flashed on its forehead, and a large amount of golden seawater that flashed with black light suddenly appeared around its body. An illusion of light and shadow appeared behind it, and the waves in the Xian Sea surged and dazzled, flashing continuously. However, the ritual did not guide the heavenly dragon back to the Xian Sea. Instead, a large amount of water from the Xian Sea was sucked into its body, causing the heavenly dragon's aura to rise further. The golden seawater that was originally flashing with black light suddenly changed color, turning into black seawater that flashed with golden light. The golden light and black sea surrounded the heavenly dragon, and its power continued to rise. Within the golden light and black sea, there were even stars floating, causing the heavenly dragon to feel as if it was in a golden sea of stars. The heavenly dragon roared, and a golden light shot out, sweeping up the water of the Xian Sea and the stars in the sky, turning into a golden heavenly river that met Xian Li's terrifying sword light. In the vast thousand worlds, streams of light pulsed in the void, and then they all shattered, emitting an ear-piercing wail of the great Tao. This wail was extremely ear-piercing at first, but became low, hoarse, and incomprehensible. The golden heavenly river was extremely dazzling, but it was filled with the intent of destruction. Wherever it passed, it left a destructive scar on the entire vast thousand worlds. There is only one person in the current Dragon Clan who had such strength, and that was the current clan leader of the Dragon Clan, a great demon in the tribulation stage, Yuan Dragon King. Unfortunately, his opponent was even more violent, tyrannical, and ruthless than him. Wherever the mystic glass sword pointed, the terrifying light shattered the golden river, the black water, the innate demonic power of the dragon tribe, and the countless dazzling stars. The ear-piercing wail of the Grand Tao was instantly cut off at this moment, and it was completely silent. The terrifying sword light arrived in front of a Yuan Dragon King, slicing through the black sea of golden light around his body. It also sliced through the demonic energy treasure light around his body, as well as his powerful body that was at the middle tribulation stage. It was truly indestructible and invincible. The Yuan Dragon King let out a low roar, and the mysterious sea of light and shadow behind him became even more violent. The mountains howled and the seas roared, and it was already completely chaotic. The golden light and black water became even more majestic. It pushed the Yuan Dragon King back into the mysterious sea. However, it could not change the fact that he had been injured by the mystic glass sword. Golden dragon blood filled the sky like a mist, and it scattered across the vast Tianhuang mainland. Silently, Xianli stood between the heavens and the earth. Her expression was cold, and her gaze was indifferent. There was no change in her expression. The violent changes in the East Sea and the grand Tao of the heavens and earth faintly trembled. The great sage and the others in Shushan also felt it. Shi Tianhao was not surprised at all. He turned his head to look at the omnipotent great sage, who looked like a giant god. The great sage's gaze was cold and solemn. He looked into Shi Tianhao's eyes, and it felt like thousands of years had passed in that instant. In the end, he let out a muffled groan, and his body suddenly leaped forward, shaking off Shi Xingyun, and was about to ascend to the sky. However, a light rose from the top of Shi Tianhao's head. The sky city and the 12 metal colossi flew out from the light above his head, and the 12 metal colossi transformed back into the 12 heavenly generals in the void. The 12 heavenly generals shouted together in the void: Immortal, Void, Instrument, Shua, Celestial, Jun, Tian, Zhu, Chaos, Wholeness, Subjugation. The 12 heavenly generals turned into 12 balls of light in the void, and then joined together to form a blue sky, restoring the original appearance of the azure sky, all heavens formation. It merged with the sky city, and its power became even greater. At this moment, the great celestial wheel rose slowly and returned to the azure sky, all heavens formation, and the sky city. It hung high in the sky, and as the light wheel rotated, the world seemed to rotate together with it. The great celestial wheel, the sky city, and the azure sky, all heavens formation above Shi Tianhao's head seemed to have merged into one at this moment. As the great celestial wheel rotated, the blue sky covered tens of thousands of miles, and it continued to expand into the distance, as if it was about to envelop the entire divine land. Although no one present had seen it with their own eyes, at this moment, the heroic appearance of the heavenly emperor, the master of the heavenly gates, who dominated the world during the last years of the ancient era, flashed before their eyes. At this moment, the person who appeared in front of them was not the mighty heavenly emperor, but another existence with an even more domineering concept of power. A cultivator who was only at the spirit refining, returning to void realm in the cultivation world, could not even be considered a teenager. His Tao law concept was even more profound than the ancient orthodoxy of the heavenly gates in the past. At this moment, the concept of power revealed by the great celestial wheel, the sky city, and the azure sky, all heaven's formation, was different from the past. Although the state of power had not recovered to its peak, the aura concept was more profound and profound. Shi Tianhao looked coldly at the great sage. The blue sky above his head opened up, and streams of airflow surged and intertwined with each other. All of a sudden, the momentum of the omnipotent sage's leap became sluggish, and he was no longer as powerful as before. His heart sank slightly. Sure enough, he saw the great celestial wheel flash and disappear from where it was. The next moment, it appeared above his head. Following this, the great celestial wheel smashed toward him, and the power of the sky city and the azure sky, all heaven's formation, was added to it. The great sage threw a punch and collided with the great celestial wheel. As a result, his upward momentum was completely disrupted, and he had no choice but to descend. The great celestial wheel flashed in the void and instantly disappeared. When it reappeared, it was right in front of the great sage. The vast energy that swept through the myriad of Daos in the world shook the universe. And under the clear sky, formed by the Jadefall Formation, there was a profound concept that existed everywhere and moved according to one's will. It was both overbearing and agile, and its might was even more ferocious. Shi Tianhao moved and instantly disappeared from where he was. When he reappeared, he was right next to the great celestial wheel. He picked up the great celestial wheel and charged toward the great sage. Although Shi Xingyun was also seriously injured, he still urged the giant dragon under him to rise into the sky and attack the great sage together with Shi Tianhao. The mysterious heavenly tree branch that had frozen the Xianxi light and shadow illusion had already been swallowed by the Xianxi water. Not only had the colorful light around it disappeared, but the tree branch itself had also turned into ashes and disappeared. However, the Xianxi ritual, which could be used again, was still in a state of stillness. Because the target it was supposed to summon, the Kunlun Dragon King, had died. All that was left was his giant corpse, floating in the void and slowly falling to the ground below. On the other side, Shun Dragon King's eyes were filled with sorrow and anger. His demonic aura became extremely violent. Gu Jun controlled the Longevity Lotus Throne and carefully dealt with him. While he was preventing Shun Dragon King from suddenly attacking with his life, he was still trying his best to trap him. The situation of the battle in Mount Shu was completely different now. Shi Tianhao had killed the Kunlun Dragon King. Although he, Shi Xingyun, Xian Longsheng, and Celestial Dipper Swordsman were also seriously injured, the Great Sage was also seriously injured. Shin Dragon King was also injured by Gu Jun when he tried to rescue the Kunlun Dragon King. The precarious situation for the human tribe had been completely reversed after Shi Tianhao killed the Kunlun Dragon King. If they attacked too quickly, the demons would fight back desperately, and some human experts would inevitably suffer casualties. However, the longer the battle dragged on, the more advantageous it would be for Gu Jun and the others. Xian Longsheng and Celestial Dipper Swordsman had been fighting for a long time, and their injuries had gradually worsened. However, they had no intention of retreating. They still urged the sky-opening sword and stared at Great Sage Zhu Yan. Great Sage Zhu Yan's expression was extremely ugly. For a moment, he was also in a dilemma. The Kunlun Dragon King was dead, and Yuan Dragon King could not break through Xianli's obstruction. Their situation suddenly became extremely difficult. Looking at Xian Longsheng and Celestial Dipper Swordsman, Great Sage Zhu Yan was full of reluctance. Even with the sky-opening sword, the strength of Mount Shu Sword Sect was still weak at this moment. If he and the Great Sage were willing to work together, they still had the confidence to destroy Mount Shu as long as they were willing to pay a certain price. However, all of this seemed to be just a fantasy at this moment. What made him even more conflicted was that if he missed this opportunity today, his chances in the future would probably be even slimmer. Thinking of the domineering power of the four great demons of the age of cultivation decline who had descended on Mount Shu together and ended up like this, great sage Zhu Yin was furious. However, if they continued to fight, even if they could kill a large number of human experts, they might all follow the footsteps of the Kunlun Dragon King and perish here. Great sage Zhu Yin looked up to the sky and sighed. He suddenly turned around and flew away from Xian Longsheng and Celestial Dipper Swordsman. The sword light of the sky-opening sword followed him like a shadow, chasing after great sage Zhu Yin all the way. However, great sage Zhu Yin activated his magic power to the extreme and focused on escaping. He soared into the sky, his 4 feet trampling the void like flames, leaving trails of flames behind. He also opened a path in the void manifested by the Azure Heaven formation. The omnipotent Great Saint quickly followed, following the path that the Great Saint Zhu Yin had opened up. Shenlong King's expression was cold, but he had no choice but to retreat. However, Shi Tianhao still activated the Great Wheel of Heavens, still chasing after the Great Sage and Great Sage Zhu Yin. In the void, Xian Longsheng, Celestial Dipper Swordsman, Shi Xingyun, and Gu Jun also followed, chasing after the Great Sage and the other great demons, not letting go of this rare opportunity. Great Sage Zhu Yin let out a strange laugh. You should worry about the people of Xianmin Tianzong in the Nether Sea first. Chapter 1411. Yuan Dragon King was pushed back by Xianli and was forced to retreat to the mysterious sea. Kunlong King was killed by Shi Tianhao. The 3 demons, the Great Sage, Shun Dragon King, and Zhu Yin, were all injured. Facing the pursuit of Shi Tianhao and the others, they could only retreat pathetically. After witnessing how Shi Tianhao blocked the ritual of the mysterious sea with the dark heavenly branch and killed Kunlong King, Shun Dragon King could not activate the ritual anymore. Although Yuan Dragon King had retreated to the mysterious sea, the ritual would be more powerful under the control of the ritual. Even if Shi Tianhao took out another dark heavenly branch, it would soon be destroyed by the ritual. It would not take long. However, Shenlong King did not dare to take any risks at this moment. If Shi Tianhao and the others gave up on Omnipotent Sage and Zhiyan Great Saint and besieged him together, the delay might decide his life or death. Even if Yuan Dragon King attacked, he had to be wary of Xian Li's obstruction. Shen Dragon King had no choice but to retreat with the Great Sage and Zhu Yin. In order to avoid being blocked by Shi Tianhao and the others, the 3 demons of the cultivation declining stage did not use the realm passage from the southern wasteland of the divine land to the vast land of infinite wasteland. They would rather escape through the outer domain void and then find their way back to the great Kiliacosm. Shi Tianhao and the others followed closely behind and chased after them. The 2 sides fought and stopped, turning the void into a wasteland and destroying countless stars in the universe. Zhu Yin was furious for being chased. He said with hatred, "You guys helped the Mount Shu sword sect to guard the mountain. Let's see if you, Xianmin Tianzong, can still be so happy after losing the harvest in the underworld sea." Shi Tianhao stared at the great saint of Zhu Yin. He had a feeling that the other party was not bluffing and was not shooting his mouth off. During the battle, Shi Tianhao had felt uneasy, but during the battle, he was focused and suppressed these thoughts. Before he was about to participate in the Battle of Shushan, he had once contacted his eldest senior brother Xiao Yin once again, asking about the specific circumstances of the sudden change in the Netherworld Sea. In the end, Xiao Yin simply said that it was fine and told him not to worry, and then the communication was cut off. Being in the same sect for many years, Shi Tianhao knew Xiao Yan's character very well. Even if he really faced a difficult and dangerous situation and the pressure was huge, Xiao Yin would still take it on by himself. However, the Underworld Sea was not a place that anyone could enter. Those who did not know the Underworld Sea would only be attacked by the evil power of the Underworld Sea. Great Saint Zhu Yin let out a strange laugh. Although the number of people who enter the Nether Sea is not as many as those who entered the Spirit Sea, it is also very lively at the moment. There are more than 1 or 2 families who dislike your celestial sect. Golden Cicada suffered a great loss at your master's hands back then. This time, I'll get back at you. How could he enter the underworld sea? Even the future glazed Buddha, lord of the future constellation, could only go through danger. He thought, wait, Shinto-zei has been missing all these years. Neither our sect nor Taishu Temple could find his whereabouts. Could he have turned to Buddhism? It was absurd to think about it. But when Xianmin, Tianzong, and Taishu Temple, and even the king of the underworld and Taoist Yuming wanted to get even with him, he could still hide without leaving a trace. The mystery behind it was quite thought-provoking. Just thinking about it made one feel that it was absurd, but under the situation where he was not accepted by the celestial sect of Wonders and the Void Temple, and even the Emperor of the Underworld and Taoist Yuming wanted to settle the score with him, he was still able to hide his tracks without revealing a single trace. The profoundness behind it was rather thought-provoking, but he did not show any clue on his face. Instead, he looked at Zhu Yan with a faint smile. You don't seem to have figured out the situation. You'd better worry about yourself first. As he spoke, Shi Tianhao suddenly jumped. He held the great celestial wheel high in one hand and stretched out the other. He clenched his fist and shouted, "Universe!" As he spoke, Shi Tianhao's figure suddenly leaped forward. He raised the great celestial wheel with one hand and stretched his other hand forward. He clenched his fist and shouted, "Universe!" The universe formula combined with the power of the azure sky, all heaven formation, and the city in the sky. The blue sky shrouded the field, causing the entire void to almost solidify and be fixed on the spot. Even Zhu Yan felt that his body was becoming more and more sluggish. It became extremely difficult to break through the shroud of the blue sky realm. Zhu Yan was also a veteran of many battles. After feeling that his talent of turning a short distance into a world was vaguely restrained, he knew that Shi Tianhao would have follow-up attacks. He was also someone who had been through hundreds of battles. When he felt that his so close to the end yet so far technique was restricted, he knew that Shi Tianhao would follow up with another attack. However, the expected attack did not come, which made Zhu Yan slightly puzzled. But all of a sudden, the white, jade-like hair all over his body stood up. He felt a great sense of crisis. The next moment, the void where he was exploded and shattered uncontrollably. Shattering the void was not something worth mentioning for Zhu Yan, the great saint. Not to mention him, even a monkey's under his knees could do it. However, the shattered void was not the space around Zhu Yan's body, but the space where his flesh and blood body and demonic soul were located. At this moment, Zhu Yan only felt that his body could not be restrained, as if it was about to shatter from the inside out. The Zhu Yan demonic ape clan was a demon clan that mastered the principles of space and achieved their talent. But at this moment, Zhu Yan felt that he could not stop the sudden shattering. He forcibly activated his demonic power to stabilize the teleportation space, but the flesh and blood on one of his hind legs were still violently twisting and shaking. There seemed to be faint cracks on Zhu Yan's left leg. The cracks were not blood vessels, muscles, and bones, but pitch black holes, as if the space had been torn apart. However, from this crack, there seemed to be a faint sound of rolling thunder. It was as if there were invisible thunderbolts exploding in the void, trying to shatter the space. Zhu Yan's expression was stern. This thunderbolt is somewhat similar to the void tribulation thunder during the nascent soul formation, but it is much stronger. Moreover, I can't even detect its whereabouts. There are also traces of the 9 heavens, formless astral wind, and the void storm, which I have never seen before. What on earth is this? The invisible thunderbolt shattered the void, as if it was born out of thin air, without the slightest trace or trace. It could appear in any corner of space and time according to Shi Tianhao's will, making it impossible to guard against. This was a brand new thunder method created by Shi Tianhao after he reached the realm of spiritual cultivation and returned to the void. He used his heavenly virtue scripture as the foundation, combined with the nine heavens' divine thunder, the nine heavens' formless astral wind, the void storm, and his own understanding of the principles of space and the power of wind and thunder. It was the nine heavens' formless void tribulation thunder. It was a brand new thunderbolt that had never appeared in the Tianyuan great world before. It could shatter the void and everything with just a thought. It was born anywhere in the void, untraceable, and yet it seemed to be everywhere. The nine heavens' formless void tribulation thunder did not have this ubiquitous quality under the blue sky formed by the azure heaven formation, but it had its own mystery. Zhu Yin shouted, and his whole body flashed with a white, jade-like luster. The red flames on his 4 feet all turned green, and the green demonic fire covered his whole body. He used all his strength to stop Shi Tianhao's magic power, so as to prevent his left leg from being shattered by Shi Tianhao's nine heavens' formless void tribulation thunder. But in this way, his movement suddenly became slightly stagnant, and his flying speed slowed down. Shi Tianhao lifted the great celestial wheel with his right hand and smashed it at the great sage, while his left hand turned into a claw and fiercely grabbed at Zhu Yin. Zhu Yin limped slightly and dodged to the side. But on the other side, Xian Longsheng and Celestial Gang Sword Venerable, one driving the sky-opening sword and the other the ancient sword Celestial Gang, attacked, forcing Zhu Yan's way, leaving him nowhere to hide. Shi Tianhao grabbed his arm. Zhu Yin roared and increased the strength of his hand, wrestling with Shi Tianhao, trying to delay Shi Tianhao's movement so that the great sage could attack. At this moment, Shi Tianhao cast the nine heavens' formless void tribulation thunder, mainly manifesting the power of the Yinyuan form. Although his physical strength was also enhanced by the city in the sky and the azure heaven formation, it was inferior to the level when he wrestled with the great sage. Although the power of Zhu Yan's flesh and blood was inferior to that of the great sage, it was still quite strong. He attacked Shi Tianhao without backing down. But Shi Tianhao just smiled. Streaks of tribulation thunder of the void of the nine heavens silently and without warning exploded in various parts of great Saint Zhu Yin's body. Zhu Yan's body stiffened again. The green demonic fire flickered, resisting the nine heavens' formless void tribulation thunder. Xian Longsheng and Celestial Gang Sword Venerable's attacks also fell on him, forcing him to defend with all his strength. On the other side, Shi Xingyan urged the giant dragon under him to reach its claws at the great sage, temporarily blocking his movement. The great celestial wheel in Shi Tianhao's right hand suddenly changed direction and smashed at Zhu Yan's head. This creation magic treasure was not like Ding of Shenzhou, which could be used to refine elixirs, nor did it have all kinds of mysterious changes like the longevity lotus, nor did it have all kinds of magical powers like the Supreme Imperial Palace. It was also not like the Golden Nirvana Bridge, which could guide heaven and earth and carry the momentum of humanity. The Great Celestial Wheel's biggest feature was its vastness. It seemed to be a powerful force that could mobilize the heavens and realms to suppress the enemy. The heavens rotated and destroyed all directions. The Great Celestial Wheel, which had been enhanced by the city in the sky and the azure heaven formation, and driven by Shi Tianhao with all his strength, seemed to have smashed the Kunlun Dragon King to death not long ago. As it rotated, it seemed as if layers of universes were being destroyed at the same time. The creation was overturned and it fell on Zhu Yin. Zhu Yin roared and tried to dodge, but his claws were caught by Shi Tianhao. He could only try his best to cut open the vital parts of his head. Then, the invisible light wheel fell on his shoulder. With a loud bang, the boundless world seemed to tremble slightly. The void where Zhu Yin was completely shattered, and there was even a terrifying power of the realm stirring back and forth. In the midst of Zhu Yan's screams, the arm that Shi Tianhao grabbed was smashed off at the shoulder by the great celestial wheel. Countless drops of blood essence drifted in the void. Great Saint Zhu Yin roared, abandoned his arm, and desperately fled into the distance. On the other side, the celestial reaching saint also let out a series of roars and fled quickly. Shenlong King did the same and fled quickly. Shi Xingyun and the ancient emperor Gu Jun followed. Xian Longsheng and Celestial Gang, Sword Venerable, did not stop. They set up Sword Light and continued to chase after the three big demons. Chapter 14:12. The great sage was injured, Shenlong Wang was injured, and Zhu Yin, the great saint, was severely injured. Although Xian Longsheng, Honorable Swordsman Tiangang, and Shi Xingyin were also injured, they were in a better condition compared to the three great monsters. Furthermore, with Gu Jun and the Longevity Lotus leading the way, they would not feel too much pressure when facing the omnipotent sage and the others unless the situation suddenly changed. After communicating with Gu Jun and the others, Shi Tianhao stopped his pursuit. Light shone from between his brows, and the divine light of origin fell again, healing the remaining injuries on his body. He stared at the void sky and thought for a moment. Then he opened his palm, revealing a talisman that flashed with dark red light. The word Yin was written on the talisman. It was a talisman specially made by Xiao Yan. It was not easy to make, and even Xinmin Tianzong had a limited number of them. It could help people other than Xiao Yan to enter and exit the Nether Sea. Although they would still be attacked by the violent disasters of the Nether Sea, it was relatively easier. Shi Tianhao crushed the talisman, and it immediately turned into a dark red light stream. It was dark and gloomy, almost black. A whistling sound came from the light stream, making one's heart palpitate as if they were facing the end of the world. The dark red light stream broke a crack in the void sky, and from the crack, a chilly wind that looked like black rays of light rushed out. Wherever the chilly wind went, the world was completely frozen. It was the Nine Serenities' chilly wind. Following closely behind the Nine Serenities' wind was the endless astral baleful qi, which looked like a red haze of light, also rushed out from within. The extremely stinky, filthy blood river also flowed out, followed by the mysterious heavenly tribulation flame, the nether evil flame, and the yellow springs true water, all of which followed closely behind, stirring and spreading in the void. Shi Tianhao looked at the crack of the Nether Sea in front of him and frowned slightly. It's more chaotic than before. It seems that Big Brother is indeed under a lot of pressure. He stepped into the crack and walked in the Nether Sea step by step. Everywhere he went, there was like an invisible passage. The passage seemed to be invisible, but a large amount of destructive power seeped in and attacked Shi Tianhao. The passage in front of him was much more difficult than what Shi Tianhao knew, but it was not a problem for him. As he moved forward, Shi Tianhao looked into the distance outside the passage and saw countless natural disasters and earthly tribulations rushing in this world without a moment of peace. A large number of disasters gathered together, forming an extremely chaotic situation. Through the chaotic scene, a huge red light pillar could be vaguely seen, piercing through the Nether Sea. The pillar of light stood there motionlessly, as if it was the only stable place in the Netherworld Sea. However, it gave off an even more palpitating and uneasy feeling. From where Shi Tianhao was, he felt an indescribable distance from the red pillar of light. Under the layers of space folding, it was hard to describe the distance between the two with distance. That red pillar of light seemed to be in any part of the space and time in the Netherworld Sea. It was very far away from Shi Tianhao. If it wasn't for Xiao Yan's talisman leading it, it would be hard to reach it even after countless years. Tian knew that the red light pillar was the ownerless creation treasure of the Nether Sea. It was the manifestation of Tian Yu's power. In the past, there were many worlds within the Nether Sea that depended on Tian Yu. They were like huge bubbles in the Nether Sea, not connected to each other. They seemed to surround Tian Yu, but they were separated by layers of space. In the past, there had been many dark sea realms and inner realms attached to heavenly disaster. They were like giant bubbles in the dark sea, not connected to each other. They seemed to surround heavenly disaster, but they were actually separated by layers of space and time. And at this moment, those world within worlds seemed to be glued together, forming a single world. Although it was still possible to see the original shape of the barrier, it was already showing signs of merging. The many worlds within worlds revolved around a red light pillar, forming a huge ring shape. That huge ring space domain was also flashing with red light. Shi Tianhao looked over and saw that above the huge red ring, there were a few existences facing each other. One of them was sitting cross-legged. He was 9 zhang tall, and below him was a huge flame lotus. Blue-purple, pure gold, milky white, and other colors flickered like a giant god of fire. This person had a black and white Tai Chi pattern on his forehead. His facial features were the same as Xiao Yan's. It was Xiao Yan's return to void dharma physique that he had obtained after training his spirit to return to the void. His body flickered with indescribable light. One moment it was dazzling, and the next moment it was dim. It was like a remnant flame in a pile of ashes, flickering between bright and dark. It was never completely extinguished, and there were signs that it would reignite at any time. In Xiao Yan's eyes, the effects of a nether sea's calamities flickered. There was also a dark red luster that undulated, making him look unusually fierce. And in front of Xiao Yan, there were other people on the huge ring. There was one person alone. It was a youth in white. His robes were embroidered with white clouds, the symbol of Taishu Temple. This person was naturally the Grand Elder of Taishu Temple, Wu Mengqi. Inheriting the legacy of his predecessors, he could also enter the Nether Sea and draw upon the power of the Nether Sea. It was just that his expression was slightly solemn. His eyes flickered with a strange light. His gaze moved back and forth between Xiao Yan and the others, but there was no joy in it. In the distance, the person who was facing Xiao Yan was a man dressed in a black dragon robe. He wore a flat crown on his head. His aura was so dignified that it made people want to bow their heads. The man looked to be in his 30s, but he was dignified and dignified. In the eyes under the crown, there seemed to be a deep black light flashing. His gaze didn't give people a feeling of fierceness or coldness, but it was like the deepest and darkest existence. It was silent and senseless, as if everything had returned to eternal rest. But in the aura that was like the world after death and the netherworld, there seemed to be a thriving vitality. It played out the mystery of the cycle of life and death, causing death to not seem so cold and terrifying. Although his appearance had changed and he had grown into the figure of a young man, whether it was Xiao Yan, Shi Tianhao, or Wu Mengqi, they could all recognize that the person in front of them was the king of the underworld who had been in seclusion. The last time the king of the underworld appeared in front of the world was during the war between the two realms. Since then, he had been in seclusion and there was no trace of him. And when he appeared this time, Xiao Yan and the others could feel that the magic power of the king of the underworld was much stronger than before. It was as if he had returned to the peak of his power in the ancient era. It had been less than 30 years since he had truly been reborn in the vast thousand worlds. The mysteriousness of the king of the underworld's magic power made Xiao Yan, Shi Tianhao, and Wu Mengqi, who came from the two peak forces of the divine prefecture, feel some admiration. This was no longer reincarnation, but a true resurrection from the dead. The king of the underworld's expression was calm and peaceful. His gaze also fell on Xiao Yan. Beside him stood a middle-aged man dressed in traditional clothes. He had a calm and indifferent expression. His eyes were like water, and there seemed to be no fluctuations in his emotions. Wu Mengqi looked at this middle-aged man with an extremely complicated gaze. This was because this man was the second-generation abbot of the Taishu Temple in history, Yin Xinghe. Wu Mengqi's master was from Wen Qiang's faction. But now, in terms of ideology, he was already different from Wen Qiang and his followers. Wu Mengqi himself was one of the leaders of the radical faction in the Taishu Temple. His ideology was completely different from Wen Qiang's, and he was even more radical than Yin Xinghe. As if sensing Wu Mengqi's gaze and recognizing his origin, Yin Xinghe also looked at him, but his expression did not change. Yin Xinghe, who had been refined into an evil soul by the king of the underworld, was still very calm when facing his junior successor. It was as if he did not feel embarrassed or angry. There was no joy, no guilt, no anger. All emotions seemed to be hidden in that watery gaze, without a single ripple. Looking at the picture of the white clouds on Wu Mengqi's clothes, Yin Xinghe's gaze was as calm as ever, without a single ripple. Wu Mengqi, however, felt a sense of sorrow. Many of the rules of the Taishu Temple, including the clothing and etiquette, were set by Yin Xinghe when he was in charge of the temple. Many of them were still in use, including the white cloud symbol on the clothes. Yin Xinghe sized up Wu Mengqi, nodded slightly, and then looked away, as calm as ever. Shi Tianhao's gaze swept across Wu Mengqi, the king of the underworld, and Yin Xinghe, then fell in another direction. There stood two people. One of them was a handsome young monk dressed in gray. It was Golden Cicada, whom he had not seen in a long time. At this moment, Golden Cicada was sitting in a lotus position, and beside him sat another young monk. He was dressed in a black kasaya, and his entire body was also emitting the precious light of the Buddhist sect. His body was like colored glass, and there were 18 golden lamps floating above his head. Within the golden lamps, there seemed to be the shadows of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas flashing, emitting bursts of Sanskrit. This young monk was as handsome as Golden Cicada, but his skin was much paler. Under the illumination of the colored glass Buddhist light, he still appeared slightly gloomy. Although his appearance had changed greatly, and he had entered the Buddhist gate, how could Xiao Yin not recognize him? This young monk in the black kasaya was the king of the underworld's grand disciple, Shun Tu-Ze, whom he had met once in the past. Shi Tianhao had also seen the true appearance of the king of the underworld's Gongzi Ze through the images of light and shadow that Xiao Yin had provided. Now that he had seen him in person, he recognized him at a glance. This person had vanished without a trace for many years, yet he had silently entered the Buddhist sect. It was slightly surprising, but it was also reasonable. The king of the underworld naturally recognized Shun Tu-Ze as well, but he ignored him. His attention was focused on Xiao Yin, who was opposite him. Shun Tu-Ze, dressed like a monk, was also looking at Xiao Yin. Both of them were currently pouring their dermic powers into the huge red halo beneath their feet, seeping into the red pillar of light in the center of the halo. Xiao Yin similarly communicated his divine, sensed dermic powers with heavenly bane. Among those present, his connection with heavenly bane was the deepest, but even he could not freely control heavenly bane and the power of the entire Nether Sea. The others were stirring the Nether Sea, forming a joint effort to interfere with Xiao Yin as much as possible. The Nether Sea tide, which had been kept out by the red halo, was now surging even more violently. Although everyone was standing on the halo and could see each other, they were still in different spaces that could not be directly touched. Only when the Nether Sea realms and inner realms completely merged and the barrier disappeared would they be able to truly touch each other. And that moment was about to come. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.